The girl lost her parents at an early age, and during a period of loneliness and melancholy, she managed to find an unexpected hobby for herself. These are fantasy novels. The main characters of such stories often encounter absurd incidents, after which they find themselves in a world unfamiliar to them. That day, she was discussing with her friend a character who had been transported to another dimension after dying in a traffic accident. And while they were chatting, their bus got into an accident. She would never have thought that she would repeat the death of that very character. She just can't believe that she's going to die like this. It doesn't matter that much, she has no reason to live on anyway. But her friend Hee Young was always there and supported her through the most difficult times to cope with it. She tried to reach out her hand one last time to her friend. Well, then someone else grabbed that hand, and the girl dreamed that her friends would allow her to find eternal happiness. But she didn't understand who it was. A voice like that could only be heard in a fantasy world. Perhaps she had died and gone to heaven. Well then, the girl opened her eyes in a completely incomprehensible place. She even smiled in surprise and began to get up. She didn't understand where she was, because she had been crushed by a bus just a couple of seconds ago. And now she is in a place where there are a lot of knights. She was very scared when one of the knights started jumping on her from above. She started screaming at him to get lost, and tried to somehow cover herself with her hands. But then she saw that the sword was melting, and the knights looked frightened. She was shocked when she saw blue flames coming out of her hands. She didn't want to believe that she had done it. Then a man would come out and say that he had had enough of this, so they should lay down their arms. He asked for forgiveness for his insolence. The man stood out from the crowd. He noticed that his soldiers seemed afraid of strangers. The girl was shocked and decided to ask who he was. The man then revealed that his name was Eric Krovia, but everyone refers to him as a prince who found himself on the battlefield because he had nowhere else to go. He was about to be killed, but her magic frightened the enemy and made him run away, so the girl saved his life. He's not going to interrogate her about who she is or where she came from. If she needs a safe place, he'll help. He asked why she didn't go with him. The girl was shocked, and she didn't even understand what she should answer. She accepted Eric's proposal and wished him her hand. But it was not easy for the citizens of the empire to accept it. They did not understand why His Highness had brought me all this, and they did not understand what it all meant. Eric tried to explain to them that she was his guest of honor, and they should treat her with respect. No matter what powers an ordinary high school girl might have given me, she can't do anything in a completely unfamiliar world. She needed social support. Eric needed her help, so she became his sword, leading the Blood Empire to victory. Thanks to this, Eric was able to ascend to the throne. In return, he awarded her the title of Duke, despite her being a woman of unknown origin. At first, many nobles were extremely unhappy with this, but as soon as she conquered the land of the Empire's strongest opponents, such sentiments immediately disappeared. 10 years later, the ballroom of the Imperial Palace of Blood. The gentleman announced Her Grace Duchess Serena Artez. Serena Artez was the Duchess of the Blood Empire and also our main character. Everyone was very happy. The lady looked simply magnificent. The lady thanked these ladies with a smile for their compliments. Eric was delighted because his goddess had finally arrived. The lady noted that she had already told him to stop with this strange treatment. The gentleman remarked that she looked very beautiful with blonde hair. The lady only replied that he should leave the compliments for his bride, because she would soon drill a hole in her. But Eric said there was no need to worry, because there was nothing between them, and it was just a political alliance. So today's banquet is being held to welcome the most honored guest from the kingdom of Arena, so they are offered to eat, drink, and be merry. She thought it looked more like he was blackmailing the defeated kingdom, holding their princes hostage, and this is not at all an honored guest. She also asked where this honored guest was now, and this surprised Eric. The gentleman asked again why she was so interested in this, and then he understood everything. The lady noted that he knew perfectly well that the prince was still staying in the outbuilding, so he needed to introduce him to the aristocrats beforehand. He told her to look at the man with platinum hair. The girl said it was incredible. She herself is a hypertrophied, powerful duchess of a crazy fantasy world, but he seems to be from a completely different genre. Eric noted that she liked faces like that. The girl was outraged, but in the meantime, this prince turned in their direction. He noted that it was impossible for anyone not to like this face. The girl approached His Majesty and noted that it was time for the first dance. She noticed everyone waiting for their dance. It was Olivia, Eric Crovius's fiancée. Then the gentleman remarked that he should ask permission to invite her to dance. The lady, of course, agreed. The main character was happy because finally it happened, because that's how it should be. But then someone turned to her and asked if she thought this holiday was a bit boring. When she turned around, she saw a guy with platinum hair. The guy came closer and remarked that if she didn't consider it rude, he would like to invite her. But the gentleman asked for forgiveness. She was not interested in dancing. The gentleman was completely shocked that it did not want to dance with him. The pitiful face wouldn't change her mind, so she looked at him with disdain. She didn't understand what he was trying to achieve by kissing her hand. She didn't understand what was happening, and he said that he would dare to say that he could make her heart flutter. The lady was in complete shock, and she didn't even know what to answer to this. When the lady felt something in her heart, she decided to agree. The gentleman was very grateful to her ladyship and bowed. Serena noted that he should know that she wasn't a very good dancer. But this did not bother the gentleman, and he continued to dance with her. The lady suddenly asked what his name was. The prince replied that he was Ricardo Arena and asked that she simply call him Rico. Well, the lady asked him for his first and last name, and the guy asked what she wanted. The lady grabbed him and bent him over and asked him what he meant. They say that will make her heart flutter. She agreed to dance solely for this question, and he seems to know nothing. When the man replied that he would like to return it to her, he meant her heart and said he was sure he could find it. From these words, it seemed to her that she actually felt her heart beating. But that's impossible, of course. She doesn't have a heart. And she realized that she had no heart only after 2 years of being in this world. Under the pretext of completing the process of conquest that had begun 2 years ago, she searched the place where her story had begun here. The kingdom of Arena. She thought she had lost her heart there. But she believes it was a fit of madness. She told Eric that she couldn't find him. Eric noted that he thought it was best left between them. People are saying that she has devilish powers. The mood in society is worse than ever. But even after that, Serena continued to look for a way to get her heart back. She didn't understand why she couldn't forget about him and live breaking through what the name of unimaginable power. She has survived countless battles and injuries that would have instantly killed anyone else. She can't believe that she will have to spend her whole life like this without ever learning to handle these powers. She didn't want to think about being left completely alone for tens of thousands of years. That's why she wants to go back and wants to become human again. But now this prince says that he would like to return her heart to her. The guy didn't understand at all what was happening to her ladyship. People didn't understand what was happening. They thought that the Duchess liked the prince so much. Others believed that she was simply going to kill him, since she was leading him somewhere so aggressively. No one knows the secret about her missing heart. It's safer for her and for Eric, but how he found out about it, on the other hand, is completely unclear. She pinned him against the wall and told him to tell her everything. Serena demanded that he tell her how he knew about her heart. The guy told her to wait and ask her to let him go. The lady was shocked when she saw this flame. She let him go and asked him who he really was. In all this time, she had never met a person with the same powers as hers, but she definitely felt a pulse, and this meant that, unlike her, he also had a heart. She had no idea where this guy came from, and he just asked her to calm down. He promised to tell her everything. This happened 10 years ago. He was visiting the fields of Arena when he saw something strange, a heart radiating crimson color. He reached for it, but something strange began to happen. At that very moment, he was sucked into a dark cave, and he didn't understand where he was. He simply believed that he had fallen underground. Then he saw that there was a dragon lying opposite him, and he became very scared. But it seems this dragon is dead. It was worth taking emergency provisions with him, because the guy didn't know how long he'd have to sit there. It will take a lot of effort to climb back up, but the only thing he can eat is here. His throat is just burning. As soon as he swallowed a piece of dragon flesh, his vision suddenly went dark, and he doesn't know how much time passed. But when he opened his eyes and came to his senses, he felt an unimaginable power spreading inside him. Without thinking twice, he began to climb up, and within a week he was finally able to get to the surface. He soon returned to Arena, and after a couple of years, rumors began to spread that the Duchess of Crovia had come to their kingdom. In order to find something quickly spread, Serena had no idea what he was trying to say. She asked again what the heart was doing next to the dragon, and she also asked how he knew that it belonged to her. The prince asked the lady if she knew anything about his homeland, and the girl replied that a dragon was depicted on the coat of arms of their country. They say that as proof of her friendship, the founder of Arena gave her heart to the dragons, receiving their powers in exchange. As her power increased, she could throw giant boulders with just one finger, and she could also split mountains in two with a single swing of her sword, and she might have heard this tale before. This is a story about her powers, and she has already heard this legend, but only perceived it as a stupid fiction. Having a witness changes everything. She needed to go to this country, so she turned around and started to walk away. The guy said that he would like to ask the lady about something. He asked again if she would do him the honor of marrying him. The girl was shocked. She turned around and asked again if she understood him correctly. He doesn't ask her to become his sweet little wife in exchange for information about her heart. And the guy said that this is not true at all. He is just asking, because I would really like her to allow him to become her husband. Lorne Ina's daughter of Baron Inus was absolutely horrified and screamed for Serena to look at it. A date with Prince Ricardo on the terrace. That's some kind of nonsense. Serena noted that she seemed to think that two unmarried people couldn't go on a date. Lorne noted that this was indeed the case, so they would sue these gossips because they needed to use their fortune to good effect, putting all sorts of scoundrels behind bars. But Serena said that there was no need for that, it was even funny. Then Serena swept so that Lorne would stop being nervous and answer her question. She is her only friend, and ancient history is her specialty. Lorne noted that this was indeed the case, but she did not understand why she suddenly became interested in Irina's story. The lady replied that she simply wanted to gain cultural enlightenment. She believed that it was better for her friend not to know anything about her heart. Legend has it that the founder of the kingdom gave her heart to a dragon. She knows it sounds absurd, but that's the story. Well, now she has answered her, so she would like to know what happened at the ball. The lady replied that there was nothing special there. She noted that the guy simply proposed to her, which is why her friend was in complete shock and simply crumbled like a stone after an earthquake. She asked Serena in horror if Lisa was telling the truth. Well, he also told a couple of interesting stories, but she decided not to tell them. Then he asked her if she would marry him, but she thought it was some kind of nonsense. She was almost swayed by his cute face, but then he said that his proposal would definitely please her. She didn't understand how this could happen, but he noticed that she had just thought about going to Arena first thing tomorrow. The gentleman replied that this was naturally so, and then he smiled and noted that she most likely would not be able to do this. The lady asked with displeasure why he thought she couldn't do it. The guy spent it with a smile that something happened in Arin after his return from the same hole. When he returned, everyone was very happy that Ricardo returned alive, but everyone was shocked. They didn't understand what was happening to the prince and thought it was some kind of devilry. But then the gentleman ordered everyone to be silent. He turned to Ricardo. It was his mother. She was glad that he had returned safe and sound to her. But she held him close and told him to tell her what had happened. Then a series of terrible experiments began. They wanted to create soldiers as strong as he was. To fight the most powerful Duchess of Blood every day was pure torture. And so the years passed. The experiments only ended when he lost his dragon powers. And then the war came to an end. Now Arena is considered the private residence of the queen, which no one can touch. Therefore, even an imperial duchess like Her Highness cannot so easily enter these lands, but everything would be different if he were his wife. He tried to say something else, but the lady interrupted him and said that she was a member of the royal family and also an imperial duchess. She noticed that he lied about losing his powers because she saw him use them. He confirmed this and noted that this was the only way to stop these experiments. After this, he asked again what he would say about this. She didn't understand whether she should play along. If necessary, she could always make him pay for his misdeeds. So she told her friend that she wanted to ask her if she knew where Ricardo was now. The girl replied that she had heard that he would reach the imperial palace, and then Serena immediately said that she had to go there. Lorne tried to stop her and asked why she had to go right now, but the lady couldn't believe that she really didn't understand. She noted that, in order to accept his proposal, Eric couldn't believe that she was actually interested in this prince, but he noted that if she wanted, she could marry him. Serena replied that she no longer thought she would approve of her idea. He noted that it was I who decided that no one dares to express dissatisfaction. Besides, she can always break off the engagement or marriage, which, to be honest, he was very happy about. But the girl did not understand why she was saying this, because it was he who said to marry the prince. The gentleman noted that he simply knew that he would not be able to stop her. He is worried about her condition because she herself said that every day her emotions are becoming less and less vivid. This only increased his excitement. At times, it actually turned out to be dangerous. Eric remarked that he was worried that she would never be able to feel love, so that's what he thought. The girl noted that she had said that there was no love for Ricardo, Eric noted that she was interested in him, or maybe he was wrong. The girl thoughtfully noted that now, in principle, there was no way back. Then the girl noted that she had one more request for Eric, and it might be a little unpleasant. But Eric told her to say whatever she wished for, everything would belong to her. The girl asked if he understood what she would like to do, and came up to him and whispered in his ear. Eric shouted that she seemed to have gone crazy, and the girl started running away. He told her to ask for anything except that. But Serena had read that it would be very profitable to sell it, but he had no idea what it was. Then the girl said that she understood him and would not talk about it anymore. Ricardo's chambers were located in one of the wings of the imperial palace. Spacious, richly furnished, but without excessive pretentiousness, they perfectly reflected the character of their owner. Serena walked inside, looking around slowly. Now that she was here, she needed to decide where to start the conversation. She had a lot of questions, and each one demanded an answer. The door suddenly swung open, and Ricardo appeared before the girl. He greeted her with a broad, almost carefree smile, as if he was glad to see her there. Serena raised an eyebrow slightly and asked curiously where his servants had gone. Aren't they supposed to be doing things like opening doors? The prince calmly replied that he didn't like having too many strangers around him. He assumed she also preferred privacy. Hearing this, Serena remembered the time she'd once slapped a butler in the face. There'd been a fly on his cheek, but by the time she'd struck him, it had already flown away. The butler instantly lost consciousness, and she'd only wanted to swat the insect. The maid who witnessed the incident was simply stunned, unsure how to react. Remembering that incident, Serena decided to agree with the prince. Then, with interest in her voice, she asked if anything similar had ever happened to him. Ricardo shrugged, noting that his blows had never made anyone faint, but he still preferred not to use force. Be that as it may, Serena was here for another reason. Their conversation at the ball had never been concluded, and now it was time to put it to rest. Ricardo understood her intentions and nodded. He was well aware that the sudden proposal could come as a real shock to her. Of course it was a shock, and if a contract was needed for her peace of mind, he wouldn't object. They could discuss the terms in advance. Serena didn't immediately understand the meaning of his words, and asked again, looking at him in amazement. She hadn't expected to hear something like that. Then Ricardo explained. If she suddenly wanted a lover, he wouldn't stop her. Such a condition was acceptable. He is ready to endure this as long as nothing constrains her, and she feels free. But Serena flushed with anger. Did this insolent man really think she was capable of such a thing? However, she kept her emotions in check, and without showing irritation, agreed to study the contract he handed her. But as soon as she glanced at the paper, she immediately tore it up, declaring that it didn't matter at all. If he answers all her questions honestly, she might consider his proposal. She needs to be sure there's no ulterior motive that could harm her. Above all, Serena wanted to understand what benefit he would gain from linking his fate with hers. It was obvious he wouldn't do it without a reason. Another important question was what his true goal was. What did he hope to gain by proposing to her? Frankly, it all seemed suspicious. It seemed like he was acting in cahoots with the queen, and this whole situation was just a way to exploit her for his own ends. Serena had read that in such cases, men often choose revenge over marriage. Why is he proposing to her if she's the cause of his suffering? He became visibly embarrassed and admitted that he still remembered the day he first saw her. For him, it was a moment he couldn't forget. The lady looked at him carefully and asked, "Does he really mean to say that their first meeting did not take place at the ball at all?" Then, he calmly replied that she was right. Everything was completely different. Their meeting had happened much earlier than she could have imagined. It happened on the very day that Her Grace destroyed his home kingdom, turning it into ruins. The kingdom of Arena offered the dragon's heart to the Empire's sword, thus showing its capitulation to the victors. Now Serena clarified, was this really the rare gem that Eric told her about? The man who presented this stone was confident that he was handing over not just a jewel, but a national treasure, a symbol of an entire kingdom. As Serena picked up the stone, she noted to herself that it looked quite cute despite its importance. But a moment later, she squeezed it in her palm, and the gem crumbled in her hand, as if it were made of fragile glass. Eric's face twisted in shock. He couldn't understand what had just happened, or why she had done it. The man holding the dragon's heart was utterly terrified. His voice trembled as he cried out in despair, asking if she understood what she had done. After all, this artifact is the purest and most precious gem in the entire world, incomparable to anything. Eric, on the other hand, remained calm. He firmly stated that Serena shouldn't worry, as he was certain she hadn't done it on purpose. Ricardo watched their conversation closely, hiding behind the wall, assessing the situation. At that moment, Ricardo realized that everything had an end. This kingdom cursed by fate was living out its final days, and soon its existence would cease forever. He felt a strange satisfaction at this thought. Whatever Serena's true intentions, she was the cause of the destruction of the Queen's laboratory. It was there that he endured years of torture and suffering, with no hope of salvation. Now all that is in the past. He once made a decision. The heart of his savior would be returned to her. No matter the cost, he would achieve it, because his debt of gratitude could not be ignored. Realizing what she'd done, Serena apologized to the man with regret. She never imagined she'd squeeze his heart so hard that it would cause such dire consequences. She was truly sorry. The prince, observing her sincerity, couldn't help but think that perhaps at that very moment he had already fallen in love with her, although he himself didn't yet realize it. The girl asked in surprise if he was serious. She was sure he was just joking and couldn't believe he was saying such things. The boy couldn't understand why she thought that way. After all, it was only one of the reasons he wanted to help her. He knew there was another, no less important one. The second reason was that after she took him as a trophy, he wanted her invasion of Arena to go well without any unexpected obstacles. He wanted to get back his heart, which had remained hidden from prying eyes for so long, and at the same moment trample the last weak hopes of the kingdom, destroying them forever. This was the sight he desired to see more than anything else in the world, so much so that the very thought of it made him beam with joy, as if anticipating a long-awaited triumph. The girl listened to him, and after thinking for a moment agreed. She even noted that she generally liked this reason better than the first. After a little thought, Serena decided that in that case, she would call him Rico, as if this new name marked the beginning of their unusual union. Ricardo was delighted, but then the lady added that she had one more condition. He must not fall in love with her, no matter how tempting it might seem. After all, such feelings could become a burden for her, an extra weight that would only hinder them from moving further towards their common goal. Hearing this, the boy was momentarily upset, but didn't say anything. He simply accepted her words, deciding it was best to remain silent. Serena, still enthusiastic, said she was looking forward to working together, as their journey was just beginning. Prince Ricardo shook her hand with a warm smile, making it clear he shared her joy completely. He confidently said he too was looking forward to this moment, as their wedding day would be special for both of them. The lady, hearing this, nodded and said that since everyone was so determined, it was time for them to begin preparations. There are many things to do ahead: choosing outfits, decorating the hall, discussing the ceremony. Serena couldn't wait for him to see it. She wanted to catch his gaze the moment he realized the full significance of what was happening. The man stood frozen in mute amazement as the legendary Eye of the Dragon from Arena appeared before him. This precious stone, shrouded in myth, shone with a magical light. He couldn't even believe he was holding it in his hands. Now, the lady knew the name of this unusual stone. Just a couple of hours ago, a servant had entered her office, and with a bow announced that His Majesty had sent her a gift, without specifying what it was. Serena examined the gift in surprise. She had had to dig the stone out of the crown she had worn for nearly 100 years. She hadn't expected to see it again under such strange circumstances. He was indignant, but he still sent her this precious stone. It seemed like the decision hadn't been easy, but he still took it, despite his inner doubts. This happened immediately after she destroyed the god's heart. It was this act that became the turning point, after which the decision was made to give her this gem. In response to her actions, the Arin authorities presented the river with another magnificent gem, a dragon's eye, which was considered a rarity even among royal treasures. Serena said that since the jeweler had looked at the stone enough now, he had to hide it in the ring so that no one would guess what kind of jewel was hidden in the jewelry. The master jeweler was shocked. He asked again if the lady really wanted him to split such a magnificent stone and set it in an ordinary ring. He had never handled such commissions before. The jeweler was certain the previous ring hadn't pleased the lady, but Serena was quick to dissuade him. The problem wasn't the design or the stone. It simply wasn't meant for her. She could already imagine Ricardo's surprise. The jeweler, on the other hand, was confused, thinking the ring was being chosen for an engagement. Unexpectedly, Ricardo himself entered the room. He immediately addressed her ladyship, asking if she had made a decision. Serena didn't even know what to say. His appearance seemed strange, especially the smile with which he looked at her. The lady declared that the choice had been made, although she had previously told him to wait. It had been decided, and now He had no choice but to accept her decision. Serena couldn't understand why he had come, or what he was doing there. It was supposed to be a surprise and everything seemed to be going according to plan, but something was wrong. The prince thought she was about to say something to him, but to his surprise, she hesitated and couldn't continue. He didn't know what to expect from her. Serena, however, noticed that whatever he chose would look absolutely stunning on him. She was sure he would look flawless. After weighing everything, she decided to take all the men's jewelry she could find. It seemed like a logical step for such an important occasion. The jeweler was stunned by her decision to take the entire collection. Ricardo was also completely perplexed, unable to understand how such a thing was possible, but he couldn't say anything. Ricardo tried to object, saying that there was no need for such expenses, but Serena just smiled and said that for her fiancé, this was a minimal gesture of attention. The prince couldn't understand her argument, as his face remained completely impassive. Nothing he heard elicited the desired reaction. He was extremely embarrassed when he thanked the lady for the gift. He felt awkward because he didn't know how to respond to her generosity and attention. Serena replied that it was nothing special, not worth the trouble. Ricardo then decided that he could thank her by covering the wedding expenses. The Duchess asked in bewilderment why this should be done, since Eric himself had said that the imperial family should do this and not someone else. Ricardo calmly explained that she needed to understand his situation. He needed everyone to believe he desperately needed this marriage, otherwise he might get into trouble. There's another contender for the throne in Iran. If he's supported by powerful allies, he could become a threat. Therefore, it's important to prove that this marriage is based on love. Serena sighed and noted that wedding preparations alone weren't enough to convince everyone. Simple words and beautiful ceremonies wouldn't change the minds of her enemies. Besides the royal family of Irina, they had other enemies, especially among the imperial aristocrats. She was certain these people would try to sabotage their marriage. Serena's mind was already filled with their conversations about how she was marrying the prince only for power and how they discussed what she would get from this union. The prince noted that it sounded as if her relationship with the aristocrats left much to be desired. It was obvious she didn't trust them. Serena didn't deny it. Ricardo thought about it and suggested that she might have a fragment of the dragon's heart left that could be used. He noted that such an artifact would allow her to collect rare works of art and send them to her enemies, thereby teaching them an unexpected lesson. Each of these gifts can be accompanied by a letter of thanks for their loyalty and good service to the empire, which will make them think. Serena looked at him doubtfully and asked if he really thought such a move would help improve her relationship with the aristocrats. Ricardo confidently stated that the nobles strive to be recognized by the ruler, no less than they love to oppress those who are below them in status. Overall, Serena acknowledged it was a good move. However, she preferred to take things slow and said she'd wait and see how they reacted to the tactic. Whatever the case, Serena felt genuine joy at marrying him. The ceremony hadn't happened yet, but that didn't matter. The main thing was that they'd taken this step, and she felt confident in her choice. The prince remarked that he wouldn't forbid discussion of the wedding among the servants. Let them talk as much as they wanted. He believed such talk would only strengthen their union in the eyes of others. Gossip was far more powerful than Lady Serena had ever imagined. While he gazed thoughtfully at the carriage, she smiled and remarked that everything was going as he had said. The power of the spirit could change many things. If he truly wants to become part of high society, then such things are simply necessary. Ricardo sighed heavily, realizing the scale of what was happening. He hadn't even expected to receive such a huge number of gifts. Serena knew her unexpected visit could be an inconvenience, so she decided to apologize. She didn't want to seem intrusive and hoped she hadn't caused too much trouble with her appearance. However, the servant assured her there was nothing to worry about. On the contrary, everyone was delighted by her visit and didn't consider it a burden. Her arrival brought more joy than trouble. Ricardo spoke with irritation about being invited to a poetry reading for lovers. The mere thought of it bored him. Listening to such poetry seemed like a real punishment. Despite being a prisoner, he managed to adapt to life in the empire's high society quite quickly. He skillfully adapted to his new surroundings, even if he didn't like everything. Serena wondered how he was feeling, what he was doing at that moment. The butler interrupted her thoughts, informing her that the item he had brought was behind those doors. The butler opened the doors, and at that moment, Serena heard a man's voice. He was saying that he was only allowing himself such remarks because the Duchess wasn't there and couldn't object. The lady could not understand what was happening, but the young man, as if knowing her thoughts, noted that, from their very first meeting, everything could have been just part of a carefully planned game. Ricardo calmly sipped his tea while the man continued to muse aloud. He said it wasn't yet clear what was more important to him, his love for her or her high status. Ricardo listened to all this in silence, and then coldly declared that he had never lied to the Duchess. In all the time they had known each other, he had never allowed himself to tell a single lie. Moreover, his words could be interpreted as blatant disregard for the decisions her ladyship made. After this, the guy was stunned and noticed that the Duchess rarely communicated with men. Perhaps that is why her actions surprised him so much. At that moment, Serena coughed softly, and Prince Ricardo immediately realized that someone was hiding behind the door and eavesdropping on their conversation. He was sure he'd just caught her gaze, even though the doors remained closed. It felt like he'd seen her through the barrier. Calmly, but with a hint of curiosity, she said she was surprised by his ability to hear her from the other side of the door. Dragon powers are truly astounding. Ricardo turned to her, and with a slight smile confirmed that he had heard her perfectly well, despite the closed doors, as if there were no barriers between them at all. He calmly replied that there were mutual feelings between him and the Duchess. The boy looked at him carefully, trying to understand what exactly the prince meant by this. Ricardo said that they both fell in love at first sight, and she always treated him with unimaginable kindness, and he does not understand whether he really should not have a weakness for this woman. Hearing this, the boy flushed with rage, his face turned pale, and his gaze became piercing. The woman in the room also became visibly alarmed, her breathing becoming ragged. At that moment, Serena entered the room. She approached the Duchess with a slight bow and apologized for her sudden intrusion, aware that she was breaking the rules of propriety. However, the situation demanded decisive action. She felt she couldn't avoid kidnapping one of the guests. The man who had just been speaking out loud was speechless upon seeing the Duchess of Artez. Serena apologized to Lady Fursha, with dignity expressing regret for interrupting such an elegant literary gathering, but circumstances forced her to intervene. However, she asked Lady Fursha to find time and visit her later at the residence, as there was something important to discuss. Lady Fursha smiled sweetly and assured him she would be delighted to accept the invitation. She was curious about the purpose of this meeting. The Duchess, with a slight smile, acknowledged that it was indeed a worthy question. The occasion for the meeting was special, her engagement to Prince Ricardo. In honor of this joyous occasion, a lavish ball will be held at her estate next week. Many influential guests have been invited. Madame Fursha immediately congratulated the Duchess, expressing her sincere joy for her. She would finally find family happiness. Serena thanked him for the kind words, and then turned to Ricardo. She wanted to introduce him to Marina, her personal designer. She would be the one to design his outfit for the upcoming ball. Serena assured him that everything would be executed flawlessly, as Marina was a true master. Frankly, she hadn't had such an inspiring role model since the Emperor himself. It was a rare occurrence. Serena smiled, asking if that was really true. However, there was a problem with all of this, and it couldn't be ignored. There was only a week left until the ball. This news stunned even the experienced designer. Marina was shocked and couldn't imagine how to cope in such a short time. However, Serena insisted on being the one to handle the matter. She confidently declared that she would select not just clothes for His Majesty, but a true masterpiece, the most exquisite and fashionable outfit in the entire empire, and right on time. Ricardo clearly wasn't expecting this. The Duchess's confidence and determination so astonished him that he even felt a moment of fear. He wasn't prepared for such a forceful statement. Marina, without wasting a second, began taking Ricardo's measurements. She worked so quickly and deftly that he didn't even have time to realize what was happening. It all happened in literally a matter of moments. Having completed her work, Marina announced that she already had all the necessary measurements and would return shortly with several costume options. She was confident she could please the Duchess. When she left, Ricardo turned to Serena. He looked at her with the clear intention of asking an important question. After a moment's consideration, he finally decided to speak his mind. Ricardo wanted to know why the Duchess had suddenly decided to announce their engagement so early. This question haunted him, so he decided to find out the truth from Serena herself. After all, when she first came in, she announced that the celebration would take place in a week and would be held at her estate. Why has everything changed now? Serena replied that perhaps it had been a bit unexpected, but she had simply received the noble's reaction to her gift. After that, the engagement decision came naturally. The entire aristocratic circle was shocked when they saw her gift. They clearly hadn't expected anything like this, and now they weren't sure how to react. The gift turned out to be a stunning sculpture inlaid with genuine fragments of a dragon's heart. It was a priceless artifact, awe-inspiring. The nobles immediately rushed to write her letters, filled with gratitude, expressing their appreciation for such a generous and meaningful gesture. In their messages, they also swore eternal allegiance to the empire, considering it their duty to respond to such a noble act of Duchess Serena Artez. It seemed the gift was truly appreciated, and Serena felt the moment had arrived. She needed to act now, while the emotions were still fresh, before the spark she'd lit faded. Ricardo immediately understood her intention. At that moment, the designer entered the room as if following a pre-planned script, ready to get down to business. She approached the prince, bowed, and voiced her request. Today, he must try on all the outfits offered, as every detail of the look was important. When the fitting was over, the designer announced with a smile that they were taking back absolutely every dress. The prince was stunned by this decision and didn't even react immediately. Serena had always dreamed of doing something like this. She hadn't had the opportunity in her past life, but now she felt like she was right at the center of her favorite story. Back in her world, she was obsessed with books and movies, immersing herself in stories. And now, having arrived here, she decided she couldn't pass up this chance. If she doesn't use the accumulated knowledge and techniques from novels, she might never have another opportunity. She needs to play by all the rules of the genre. When Ricardo had donned one of the outfits, he turned to her, waiting for her reaction. He was curious to know what Her Highness would say, whether she liked what she saw. The question was more about how he looked in the suit, since he himself already knew he looked magnificent. He truly was stunning. The designer, observing this, remarked that in her entire career, she had never met a person who looked so perfect in a suit. Of course, this effect wouldn't have happened without her professional intervention. It was her skill that allowed the outfit to shine so elegantly. Something was clearly missing, though Serena paused, then turned to Marina, who had one small but crucial detail. She nodded and pulled out a pre-prepared item she believed it would perfectly complement the look and be the finishing touch. It was a ring. She carefully placed it on Ricardo's ring finger, and he froze in amazement, not expecting such a turn of events. He immediately recognized the stone. It was a dragon's eye. Serena smiled, noting that she couldn't give her future husband something cheap and tasteless. Ricardo felt uneasy. He felt that such a gift was too precious, and he wasn't sure he had the right to accept it. Serena just chuckled. It was strange to hear something like that. It was just an arranged marriage. Did it really mean that much to him? Serena suggested that if it bothered him so much, perhaps he should just think of the ring as a down payment. Then it wouldn't seem like such a big deal. After her words, he paused and suddenly realized that this was indeed the down payment. The lady nodded in agreement as the situation had become a little clearer. Serena decided to ask Marina what she thought. Marina immediately assured her that the ring was perfect and she would never let her down. Moreover, she was certain that Prince Ricardo would steal the show at the ball. Preparations took longer than planned. It was already late, so Serena invited the prince to stay the night with her, to save energy on the return journey. Ricardo didn't object at all. On the contrary, he seemed pleased and said he would be very grateful for the hospitality. However, Serena found it odd that he still seemed a bit down. She wondered what was wrong and decided that perhaps he simply didn't like his new clothes. The guy just smiled and calmly replied that nothing important had happened. His words sounded so casual that it seemed like there was nothing to worry about at all. Returning to the jewelry, he noticed that the girl was probably choosing a gift for the king. To him, this seemed perfectly natural, as the choice had been carefully considered. Serena froze in utter bewilderment, unable to understand why she'd even thought of giving Eric anything. It seemed so ridiculous to her that she couldn't even immediately find what to say. But then a memory surfaced. When Eric first met her, he called her a goddess. The words had sounded strange then, but now it seemed people perceived their connection as much deeper than it actually was. From the outside, they seemed to share something more. Those around them, unaware of all the nuances, see in their interactions not just politeness, but a hint of intimacy. Although in reality, nothing ever happened between Serena and Eric. This is an undeniable fact, and it certainly won't change in the future. Anything that could have led to this has long since lost its meaning. Nevertheless, the prince still tried to explain something. He clearly wanted to clarify the situation, but apparently understood that he no longer had a chance of changing Serena's mind. Finally falling silent, he heard the lady confidently declare she understood that this was troubling him, but there was no need to worry. No matter what the gossip, she had no intention of breaking the marriage contract. Moreover, she openly admitted that she didn't find Eric attractive. To her, he was simply a person connected to her by circumstance, not feelings. As Serena was about to leave, she suddenly felt Prince Ricardo block her path. He firmly closed the door in front of her, preventing her from leaving the room. Leaning a little closer, he quietly but insistently asked if she wanted to tell him she found him attractive. His voice was hesitant, but his words conveyed genuine interest. A slight look of confusion crossed his face momentarily, putting Serena on guard. She hadn't expected this turn of events, and his sudden emotionality even startled her a little. The lady replied with a slight smile that of course that was true, for he was simply the very picture of perfection. It was no wonder that even she had noticed him. If her gaze lingered on him, even for a moment, it meant he truly possessed something special. Perhaps it was his face that played a role. The lady raised an eyebrow and asked again if he was really implying that she was the kind of person who looked only at the outer shell and not at the essence. The boy hastened to assure her that he would never have dared to say such a thing. He was only too happy to take advantage of her generous offer. This is simply wonderful. If he suddenly needs help, he can ask for it without hesitation. He just needs to call and she will support him. Serena stood next to the man and couldn't understand why he had come so close. What was he up to, and why wasn't he keeping his distance? She smiled and noted that since they were now married, there was nothing stopping them from practicing this every day so as not to lose their dexterity. As she spoke, she deftly dodged his attacks during training. Their wrestling and fencing became a unique form of communication. Serena smiled and admitted she hadn't felt such a surge of energy in a long time. Her entire body felt energized. Every muscle vibrated with vitality, and she felt as if she could move endlessly. Prince Ricardo, observing her enthusiasm, only chuckled and declared that if she liked this process so much, then she could train around the clock and no one would stop her. Ultimately, Serena prevailed over her opponent. The fight was tough, but she saw it through to the end and now stood there breathing heavily. But feeling pleased with herself, she looked down at him and with a smirk remarked that he really shouldn't be so dramatic and get up already. After all, it was she who had almost crashed into the ground, not him. At that moment, she noticed she'd accidentally left a cut on his face. He examined the injury and suggested it was most likely a fragment of shrapnel that had gotten caught in an unfortunate way, then suggested they continue the duel. But Serena asked him to wait a bit. She didn't want to hurt him again, although she believed that if he'd dodged better situations like this, could have been avoided. As she approached, the prince only smiled carelessly, as if the scratch did not bother him at all. She sighed heavily. It was hard to see that expression again. Lately, it felt like everything she did was for these moments. She only hoped he wouldn't be left with a scar. At that moment, the butler approached her and respectfully informed her that His Majesty had finally responded to her invitation. The lady was surprised to hear Rick's answer. She even hesitated for a moment, but the butler confidently confirmed that it was indeed true. She was interested in what he would say, and she decided to watch anyway, not hiding her slight curiosity. Ricardo asked again if His Majesty would really come. He carefully watched the lady's expression, which changed dramatically. Serena silently reread the letter, which clearly stated that Eric would not come. An oppressive silence hung in the air, creating a tense atmosphere. No one knew what to say. Finally, Serena calmly remarked that it was his choice. She'd sent the invitation out of politeness, and it didn't really matter to her. However, at the same time as she said these words, she burned the letter irritably, throwing out that she already knew that damn Eric would do exactly that. She ordered the butler to write down a reply for her, and Prince Ricardo watched silently, as if thinking about something. Ricardo wanted to tell her something important, mentioning that they had a day off today. The lady thought for a moment. Then she noticed that he seemed to want to return to the palace, and remembered that she needed to go there too. Prince Ricardo nodded in agreement and said that their next meeting would then take place at the ball. He spoke confidently, yet with a hint of thoughtfulness. As he turned to leave, Serena looked after him strangely. Something elusive flashed in her gaze, but it was definitely different from her usual expression. Her expression was enigmatic, and it was difficult to decipher its meaning. However, at the last moment, she glanced at the prince once more, as if an unexpected discovery had flashed through her thoughts. Meanwhile, back in his room, Ricardo relaxed on the sofa. He took his time, allowing himself to rest a bit and collect his thoughts. His fingers instinctively brushed against the scar, and memories came flooding back. He hadn't gotten that scar by accident. It represented an important part of his past. He remembered Serena's words about how, if he had dodged, none of this would have happened. The thought made him pause and replay the events of that day in his mind. The prince felt a twinge of embarrassment at the memory, but couldn't help but smile. Her words had struck a chord with him, leaving behind a strange sensation. Another thing came to mind, how she'd called him Erica and said he always acted like that, so she knew his habits and anticipated his actions. He stood up, wondering how much longer it would take for him to be closer to Her Highness. This thought haunted him. He held a pocket watch in his hands. He slowly looked up at the sunset, lost in thought, unaware of the warm hues that were taking over the sky. It was gratifying to realize that the girl had decided to deliver the invitation personally rather than entrust it to servants. Such a gesture demonstrated her respect and sincerity. The thought of her soon-to-be ball seemed unbelievable. It was a momentous event that could change her life, and she couldn't believe it. Serena knew that if this was indeed the case, she needed to act quickly. The element of surprise could work to her advantage, and she couldn't let that opportunity slip away. Her friend believed they would remain friends even after the wedding. Yes, Serena might divorce Ricardo, but she and her friend would never part. Lorne sternly warned against joking about divorce. While she would have been pleased to hear it, such things were best not discussed lightly. Whatever choice Serena made, Lorne was certain of one thing: she would always support her. It didn't matter to her what happened next. In this girl, Serena saw a reflection of her friend from a past life. It reminded her of her school years full of warm memories. She remembered how her friend had once told her she would always be by her side. Those words had seemed simple then, but now they took on special meaning. If you think about it, they really were very similar. They shared a similar sense of humor, shared similar views. It seemed they understood each other perfectly. Lorne, noticing Serena's thoughtfulness, asked her what she was thinking about. Serena quickly dismissed it, saying it was just bad memories. Lorne had always found Serena a little odd, though she couldn't quite explain why. At times, her thoughts and actions struck her as unusual, outside the bounds of what was expected of a noblewoman. She recalled an incident when Serena was loudly arguing with a man. She was clearly agitated and demanding to know why she specifically was forbidden to do what others were allowed to do. Serena pressed her to find out if there was a specific law prohibiting women from taking the entrance exams to the Imperial Academy. She insisted there had to be a clear reason, not just empty excuses. The man answered her that it was not a matter of strict law, but of tradition. It was believed that ladies of high society should develop their talents in other areas intended for them. Lorne, puzzled, asked what specific areas he meant. The man, without hesitation, listed the traditional pursuits of noblewomen: the art of conversation, exquisite tea drinking, and the art of choosing the right crown. It was then that Lorne first saw Serena. The girl was engaged in a heated argument with the same man, and then, noticing Lorne, she suddenly turned her attention to her, looking in surprise at the Duchess who had just appeared. It turned out to be Duchess Artez, the only woman in the Empire to hold that lofty title. The man hastened to justify himself, claiming it was an unfortunate misunderstanding. However, Serena did not lose her composure and firmly stated that, according to the laws of the Empire, a woman could not receive a ducal title, making it clear that she had before her an example that refuted this rule. The man was clearly at a loss for words. His expression was troubled, and the Duchess merely noted with a slight smile that he seemed to have nothing to say in response. She then turned to Lorne and asked her name. The girl politely replied that her name was Lorne Inez, though she felt a little awkward under the Duchess's intense gaze. The man watching this could hardly hide his bewilderment. He couldn't understand why Lorne addressed the Duchess so simply when, according to the rules, persons of such rank were to be addressed with due respect. But the lady said it wasn't necessary. She actually liked it much better this way. Returning to the subject, she became a duchess, even as a woman, so she has no reason to prevent the lady from taking the exams. The man confirmed that everything was exactly as she had said. Upon hearing this, the mistress immediately ordered the servants to ensure Ains arrived at the exam on time. Lorne felt immense gratitude toward the Duchess. Her generosity and fairness made a strong impression, and Lorne immediately warmed to her, even loving her image. After a moment's hesitation, Lorne looked at Serena and asked with a smile if she realized how stunning she looked at that moment. She wanted to hear her opinion. The question caught the lady off guard, and she became embarrassed. Unsure of what to say, Serena simply turned away. She had never thought about it, or attached any importance to such things. But as Lorne had said, Serena did feel different that day. It was as if she had the power to change something, and that feeling was entirely new. However, despite all the hype surrounding her, Ains failed the exam. Many simply laughed at this, dismissing it as a hilarious misunderstanding. After all, the entrance exams to the academy weren't all that simple. It's unlikely that an inexperienced self-taught student could have passed them without proper preparation and the necessary knowledge. However, there were also those who suggested not judging her too harshly. After all, they said the girl would soon understand everything herself and simply abandon the idea, finding herself a more advantageous match. However, in essence, nothing had changed. Serena understood this and felt embarrassed about what had happened. She admitted that she wanted to apologize for the situation. It all happened simply because she lacked knowledge. Lorne understood this and tried to console her friend, convincing her that she shouldn't beat herself up over her failure. Serena said that this was not true because the only thing she lacked was the support of her loved ones. But Lorne said that she could not be broken because she was still studying hard. Lorne, too, is trying her best to support her friend. Everything that's happening reminds her of a scene from a book she recently read in which the heroine found herself in a similar situation. In a world where most people fear, Serena Lorne remains one of the few who accepts her without fear or prejudice. She ignores rumors and treats her with genuine kindness. She feels at ease with Serena as if they've known each other their whole lives, just as she once felt at ease and at peace with her childhood friend, Hee Young. Frankly, Serena feels similarly around Prince Ricardo. He doesn't judge her either, but rather seems to see something more in her. She remembered his words about how thanks to him, she would have a chance to gain his assistant's understanding. It seemed strange, but for some reason, it excited her. She may already have a few guesses as to why the prince has caught her interest so strongly. It's not just curiosity, there's something special about him. Lorne interrupted her thoughts and asked if Serena was listening. She apologized guiltily and admitted she'd been thinking about Ricardo without even realizing it. Lorne immediately pouted. She believed that friendship should be more important than any prince. If this continued, she might even cause a slight offense. To prevent this from happening, Serena quickly apologized to her friend, hoping that she wouldn't be angry for long. She was surprised by the letter from Irina, but she was even more amazed that the prince personally came to deliver it. Ricardo merely nodded, confirming her guess. He truly believed this letter was worth opening together. Ricardo carefully took her hand, looked into her eyes, and with a slight smile reminded her that very soon they would become husband and wife, which meant there should no longer be any mistrust between them. Serena nodded, noting that this was certainly wonderful. However, she was more interested in the letter. She looked at it again and asked if it was really from Queen Rita, his adoptive mother. The prince confirmed that the letter was indeed from her. However, as Serena began to unfold it, he suddenly reached out, trying to stop her. She froze, unable to comprehend the reason for such a reaction. Suddenly, the faint scent of roses filled the air, delicate yet somehow unsettling, evoking a strange premonition. Ricardo looked at her tensely and asked her to wait. He explained that the letter was laced with poison, and if she touched it now, the consequences could be fatal. Serena frowned, noting that Ricardo didn't seem particularly surprised by what was happening. It was as if such events had become a habit for him. The prince calmly confirmed her guess. He said he'd encountered many similar incidents in his life. Assassination attempts on him were not uncommon, and over time, he'd learned to expect them. Then, he looked closely at Serena and asked, why didn't she look surprised either? Didn't it bother her at all? The girl remained silent, simply looking at him. Ricardo chuckled and added that judging by her appearance, there was no need to ask. The answer was obvious. Serena calmly replied that it wasn't surprising. Citizens of the defeated kingdoms constantly threatened her, but right now it was more important to understand what the letter said. In the letter, the woman reported that news had reached them of the prince's upcoming wedding. She wrote that His Royal Majesty was absolutely delighted with the news. The hidden meaning may be the following: the idiot king will bless their union, but the nobility is strictly against it, so all hopes of taking the throne must be abandoned. Prince Ricardo has managed to win the Duchess's favor, charming her and captivating her with his words and actions. But he must remember one thing: her kingdom will remain under her control, and no one, not even he, must encroach on it. Hearing this, Serena couldn't help but exclaim loudly that this was precisely the point of what was happening. However, Ricardo, remaining calm, suggested that she not dwell on such things, but Serena couldn't simply ignore this point. Even if her actions incurred Queen Irina's wrath, Serena was willing to take the risk. The wedding was her priority, and she would do everything to ensure it happened no matter what. She thought she'd feel awkward and self-conscious in her wedding dress. However, when she saw her reflection, she realized it accentuated her beauty, making her even more beautiful than she could have imagined. After all, money really can give a person a feeling of happiness. The maids who worked on the outfit decided that such words could be interpreted as praise for their skillful work, as they had poured their whole soul into it. They had never put in so much effort before, and now they were certain that Lady Olivia would never outshine Serena at her engagement ball. Serena would be the center of attention that evening. But looking at herself, Serena wondered if it all looked a bit too much, too luxurious, too perfect. She felt a twinge of doubt, but quickly pushed the thought aside. After all, Eric said he wouldn't come, which meant Olivia most likely wouldn't show up at the ball either. And if she wasn't there was no need to worry about anyone upstaging her. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Hearing a voice behind the door, Serena replied that of course he could come in. When the door opened, she found Ricardo standing before her. Serena couldn't hide her surprise when she saw Ricardo. The suit accentuated his assets fit perfectly, making him look even more elegant. She hadn't expected clothes to transform him so much. However, Ricardo didn't let her stare at him for long. He remarked with a slight smile that despite all the compliments, Serena looked incomparably better. Her beauty outshone everything else that evening. Hearing this, Serena coquettishly agreed. She herself was pleased with her appearance today. Everything was perfectly chosen, and she felt not just good, but magnificent. Ricardo's gaze slid to the elegant jewelry box. He turned to the maid, asking her to let him help Serena put on the necklace himself. It was a gesture that held special meaning for him. Serena merely smiled slyly, and bowing her head slightly, replied that if he really wanted to, he could do it. Ricardo immediately and happily agreed, stepping closer. He carefully fastened the necklace, then cast a searching glance at her. The precious stones perfectly accentuated her beauty. He admiringly remarked that the jewelry seemed as if it had been made for her, and asked her opinion. After a short pause, Ricardo asked thoughtfully, did she really think that he could become as beautiful an adornment in her life as this necklace? Serena confidently replied that she did, because no man in the world could look better next to her than he did. For her, this wasn't just a compliment, but a sincere conviction. These words confused Ricardo, and Serena, curiously, asked how long he planned to address her so formally. She wondered when he would get used to being addressed more warmly. He hesitated slightly, but deciding to play along, promised to watch his language. In his very next sentence, he deliberately called her not Duchess, but simply Lady, making it clear he was willing to change for her. The man entered the ballroom and immediately noticed that everything about the Duchess of Artes was impeccable. Every detail of her attire, her posture, her manners, everything testified to her impeccable taste. It was Duke Zenith, a representative of one of the most influential noble houses. As he surveyed the hall, he caught a conversation about a mysterious carriage arriving at the palace. Conversations died down as everyone turned around. Lady Olivia stood in the doorway, her appearance seeming to surprise everyone. Eyes involuntarily dropped to the emblem on the carriage. For a moment, many thought the emperor himself had arrived, but it soon became clear he was not accompanying his bride that evening. Duke Zenith approached to greet the future empress. Lady Olivia noted that it had been a while since their last meeting and asked how he was doing. He replied that all was well in his domains. The lands of the great empire, built by the wisdom and will of the emperor, were flourishing, as was he himself. Then Duke Zenith remembered that Lady Olivia had probably heard about the stone in the engagement ring that Duchess Artes had given to Prince Ricardo. However, their conversation was interrupted by a couple approaching them. It was Mrs. Olivia, accompanied by her fiancé, Prince Ricardo. The Duke smiled and remarked that he could not miss the celebration in honor of the engagement of a man who had made such a significant contribution to the development of their great empire. The lady remarked that she was very glad that he had accepted their invitation, and the Duke said that the scale of the event was evidence of her status. Suddenly, there was a dull sound. The glass slipped from his hands, and hitting the floor shattered into tiny pieces. Red wine spilled across the marble, creating ominous patterns. A woman with a menacing expression stood at the door. It was the mistress. Her gaze was cold and piercing. The Duke instantly felt alarm. He didn't understand what had happened, but he knew nothing good was to be expected. Meanwhile, one of the guests carefully examined the remains of wine in the broken glass. He frowned and confidently declared that the drink contained a sleeping pill. Apparently, he had often encountered such threats. The Duke turned sharply to his mistress, his voice trembling with horror. He tried to figure out if she had actually drunk the poisoned wine. The thought made his heart clench with fear. Serena calmly noted that even on such a bright day, someone had dared to infiltrate her territory. They could have been assassins from another country determined to test her vigilance. Surprisingly, someone tried to poison her guests with a sleeping pill. It looked less like a serious conspiracy and more like a child's prank, but even such trivial things could have unexpected consequences. Without further ado, the lady handed the Duke a new glass of wine. However, he declined it with regret, bitterly noting that even after the war's end, a peaceful life had never returned for them. Serena calmly reminded him that Eric had already introduced them at the previous imperial ball. The Duke had probably simply forgotten. The young man nodded, confirming her words. He added that he had an excellent memory, especially since he and the Duke had served together for a long time, meaning they knew each other very well. He looked thoughtfully at his mistress, and with a slight smile noted that she was probably surprised by what was happening. Such incidents happened all too often to the prince's fiancée. He wondered if Ricardo was prepared for this. The prince calmly replied that it was a very small price to pay for the opportunity to be with Lady Serena. He knew what he was getting into and didn't doubt his choice for a second. The Duke laughed awkwardly and remarked that he and Serena were simply perfect for each other. There was envy in his voice, but also genuine admiration. Serena narrowed her eyes slightly at his words. She noticed he was more talkative than ever today. It even surprised her a little. Turning back, she noticed a familiar silhouette. It was Olivia who had just appeared in the hall. Olivia bowed her head respectfully and apologized for her late arrival. Her voice was filled with genuine respect. Olivia returned Serena's greeting with a slight smile. By this time, whispers had already begun to break out around her. People were discussing the Duchess speaking to her. Their conversation had clearly attracted the guests' attention. Olivia glanced at Serena and noted that her mistress, like a startled hare, was overly cautious. She then added that His Majesty, unfortunately, was unable to attend today's celebration. Looking closely, Olivia noticed rings she'd never seen before. Now she knew exactly what they looked like. An understanding flickered in her eyes. At the same time, it became known that the Empire's first sword had turned traitor. In response, His Majesty decided to bestow upon Serena the Infinite Dragon's Eye, a relic of immense value. It was hard to even imagine that this jewel could be returned to the prince. The thought seemed almost unbelievable. The guests began to whisper excitedly. Apparently the rumors were true. The rings were indeed crafted using Dragon's Eye, a unique gemstone that the Kingdom of Erin had once gifted to the Empire. The Duke was shocked to the core. He hadn't expected Lady Olivia to be so forthright in saying what everyone had only guessed. Serena tried to speak up, addressing her mistress, but Olivia seemed not to hear her. She was completely immersed in her thoughts and was in no hurry to interrupt. Now Olivia turned her gaze to Prince Ricardo and asked curiously what it was like to not only win the heart of the Duchess, but also to return the national treasure of her country. The prince remarked that he would never have said such words in such a situation. His reaction would have been completely different if he had been in that woman's place. He was certain of it. The woman gave him a disdainful look, but the young man, unfazed, said he was now engaged to Lady. It was a momentous declaration, and he seemed confident in his words. Thus, it's safe to say she still holds the Dragon's Eye. It remained in her possession, despite the changes in her situation. For the prince, this woman was the greatest honor, and he would have given everything for her, including his life. His feelings were sincere and strong, and he made no secret of it. People around him began whispering, wondering how he could have said such things. All this talk only fueled the curiosity and confusion surrounding their relationship. The prince seemed truly besotted with her charms. Serena noted that at such ceremonies, everyone usually openly expressed their feelings, but they decided not to. They decided to skip the traditional part of the ceremony, as everyone was already well aware of their feelings. Instead, they thanked their guests for coming to the celebration. At the end of the evening, they wished everyone a pleasant time. Although Olivia was clearly dissatisfied with the proceedings, her face expressed disappointment and dissatisfaction. At the end, Serena wished everyone a safe journey home, after which they began to say goodbye to their guests. She tried to maintain her goodwill despite the atmosphere. After the ceremony, they headed up to the second floor to join the prince. This was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, and everything ahead was in the hands of fate. Serena noticed Ricardo laughing, and it couldn't help but catch her attention. She decided to find out what was going on, as his laughter didn't quite make sense to her. The guy explained that he felt good when she defended him. It seemed so important to him that he couldn't hide his joy at her support, even in such a difficult situation. The lady in response smiled slightly and noted that even the smallest things pleased him. She couldn't help but notice how much he appreciated her small gestures of attention. Ricardo, for his part, said he sincerely believes he will never forget this moment and the entire ceremony. For him, it was an event that will leave a mark on his life. They decided to leave the guests and simply stand alone, enjoying the sunset. It was their quiet moment, filled with peace, far from the hustle and bustle. At one point, Serena, clearly unable to contain herself, slammed the table. She was furious at the noble house's treatment of her engagement, and she couldn't remain indifferent. She said they'd so readily accepted the dragon's heart, but still refused to approve of her relationship with Ricardo. This deeply hurt her, and her irritation was evident. Eric, trying to calm her down, told her not to worry. He didn't think it was anything serious, and she shouldn't worry about it so much. Eric noted that they still hadn't given their consent for the wedding, even though he'd been engaged for a whole year. He even joked that this had almost become the norm in their circle. Serena noted with a smile that Eric wasn't particularly bothered by this, since he clearly wasn't eager for a wedding, unlike the emperor. He simply wasn't eager to get married. She also couldn't help but notice that he, like many others, takes matters of state lightly. He seems to have enough time to simply enjoy himself. The emperor, with a slight smile, said he didn't want to dedicate his entire life solely to work. It was important for him to find a balance between his duties and personal moments. The lady was certain he was incorrigible. She trusted Duke Zenith, but despite all her expectations, he repaid her trust with a knife in the back. It was a betrayal, and she felt betrayed. Yes, he probably has a hard time standing up to the nobles. Arguing with them is always difficult, especially when he's essentially an emperor himself, but still, given his position, he needs to take more decisive action. Serena declared she was done taking things as jokes. The time had come, and she was ready to take the offensive, to take action, and not waste time on useless chatter. Eric asked her to make things so messy that he could then more easily clean up and tidy everything up. He was counting on her help, but she was already determined to take more decisive action. Serena couldn't believe he was still joking around in this situation. She'd grown tired of his easygoing manners, told him she'd had enough and was leaving. It was time for real action, and her patience was at its limit. Eric also noted that Alibi had said she'd like to meet her. He tried to convey this message, thinking it might somehow help their situation, but he didn't realize how important it could be. Serena asked with disdain why she needed to meet Alibi. Eric couldn't answer the question precisely, but simply said he had to deliver this message, and that was it. She felt it made no sense. Serena began to wonder what Olivia really wanted from her. She suspected it wasn't that simple, and she tried to figure out what exactly was behind her request, what she was planning. Serena remarked sarcastically that Eric seemed to have already become the future empress's errand boy. She saw him obeying her, and she didn't like it. Eric was now in a subordinate position. Eric didn't answer, but quietly added that she shouldn't forget that she herself had once turned down this position. He reminded her that the choice was hers, and she must remember that, without losing her confidence. Eric said this with a smile, but she was deeply angry. She couldn't understand why he'd even brought this up. It was completely out of place in their conversation. She was outraged. The photograph of such an independent and young lady receiving a ducal title must have shocked the older aristocrats. It was a great surprise for them, as she didn't fit into their usual mold. However, despite her title, she still didn't have the kind of power that would allow her to fulfill all her desires. She knew she didn't have the strength to ensure absolute influence. Then Eric turned to her and said that in that case, she could become empress. He offered her the chance to become ruler, as that would give her all the power she needed to realize her plans. The girl was frightened and asked him again what he was even talking about. She couldn't understand how he could propose something so serious and responsible. She wasn't ready for such conversations. Eric explained what he meant. If she were empress, all power would be in her hands. Then she would be able to control the situation and not depend on the decisions and influences of others. He added that he could shield her from all the responsibilities that didn't interest her, thus helping her focus only on what was important. It sounded like an offer worth its weight in gold. But the girl asked him not to joke. She wanted to know if he was serious. She didn't know what to think, as such words were shocking to her and didn't meet her expectations. She felt a little flustered and hesitated, unsure how to react. She couldn't fathom that Eric could offer her something like that. She felt confusion creeping up on her. Now, the girl replied that she had been much younger and more naive back then. The proposal seemed too far-fetched and difficult to understand. She wasn't prepared for such questions. Eric was a little relieved by her answer, hearing her say she was young, but he also noted that he had been young then too, and hadn't understood much. Time changes people. However, Eric was upset because she was once again erecting a stone wall between them. Whenever the conversation touched on such topics, he felt their relationship growing increasingly frosty. It was as if she were warning him not to go any further, as if she were placing an invisible barrier between her and him. This feeling of a wall made him feel as if their conversations couldn't be honest and open. Serena decided to find out what Lady Olivia had actually said and understand the meaning of her words. This was important to her, so as not to remain in the dark. The gentleman, with a slight sigh, explained that Olivia had simply suggested stopping for tea, not alone, but with the prince. It was an important clarification, which slightly surprised Serena. This message stunned Serena, and she asked doubtfully what was going on. Perhaps Olivia was trying to make up for her strange behavior at the ball, but what did it really mean? Serena, confused, tried to make sense of the situation, unsure how to react. She couldn't figure out what could have caused Olivia's sudden reaction. Olivia thanked Serena for her time and hoped her confession would be taken seriously. She had something important to say, and her words were meant seriously. Serena continued to drink her tea in silence, lost in thought. She didn't know what to do, and her gaze was focused on the cup, which was increasingly filled with vague doubts. Unable to resist, she asked again if she had truly understood Olivia's words about confession. She couldn't understand why she was so nervous, or what lay behind this unexpected confession. The prince sat nearby, listening intently, and Olivia realized she was indeed right. Everything that was happening was raising even more questions in her mind, and the situation was becoming increasingly tense. Ultimately, Olivia confessed that she wanted to share her feelings with the Duchess of Artes, declaring her love. It was a frank and bold admission that shocked everyone. The relationship between them had always been far from friendly. Olivia had never shown much warmth toward her, but now she suddenly spoke as if they were old friends. Serena was sure it was just a joke or a ridiculous prank, but inside, curiosity was growing. What was really behind Olivia's words? What was she trying to achieve by bringing this up now? Serena desperately wanted to understand, but she couldn't yet figure out what exactly her interlocutor wanted. Olivia noted that perhaps the lady no longer remembered these details. Perhaps it had all lost its significance to her long ago. But once in their distant youth, it had been important. When Olivia was just beginning her journey in high society, she sincerely admired Serena. As a young debutante, she looked up to the one who stood out among the other girls. However, all the young women back then felt similarly. Serena was a role model, someone to look up to. Her confidence and position made other girls look at her with awe and admiration. Of course, each of them primarily thought about a good marriage, since that's what ensured a woman's place in society. But Serena always stood out. She didn't limit herself to finding a worthy husband. She ruled an entire duchy, wielding power unmatched by others. She was a woman capable of changing not only her own destiny, but that of the entire nobility. That's why Olivia and others hoped that Serena would become empress. Many believed that her arrival would usher in a new era, bringing the changes everyone had dreamed of to the empire. However, Serena suddenly interrupted her. She apologized for interrupting, but couldn't help but ask the question that had been bothering her. She wanted to understand why Olivia was telling her all this now. Why had she suddenly decided to recall the past and share her thoughts? What was the meaning of these revelations? The prince was certain Serena was only saying this because they were now engaged. He believed her words were dictated not by sincere desires, but by the obligations that betrothal imposes. If the wedding takes place, Lady Serena will likely remain in the empire, start a family, and devote herself to a new life. This path seemed logical and even expected given her position. Olivia believed that Serena wanted not only to become a duchess, but also to establish herself in aristocratic society, making significant changes that could affect the entire empire. Observing Serena's fiancé, Olivia concluded that he was far from stupid. However, this didn't endear her to him. In fact, she looked at him with obvious disdain. However, Serena had no intention of living up to her expectations. She politely apologized, but made it clear she had no intention of following someone else's plans or building her life according to their demands. All this only emphasized her true attitude. Her attachment to this country was not so deep as to force her to sacrifice her desires for the sake of the empire. Serena was tired. The endless killing saving others, the constant responsibilities. It was all wearing her down. She couldn't continue living at this pace, devoting herself entirely to those around her. Now she wanted to think about herself. If before she had sacrificed herself for others, now she realized that the time had come to save herself, to find a new purpose and a peaceful life. Olivia understood her feelings. Serena had been through a lot, and Olivia couldn't blame her. She knew the price she had paid for everything she had done. All she wanted to say was that if Serena ever changed and wanted to go back to her old ways, Olivia would be happy to accept her for whoever she became. Serena hadn't expected such words. It was truly unexpected. Olivia seemed like a completely different person to her. Perhaps she'd underestimated her. Turning around, Serena noticed that Ricardo's face was gloomy and focused. She was surprised by his expression and decided to ask why he had suddenly become so gloomy. The prince admitted that it was unpleasant for him to see how a woman who had previously shown care and generosity now so selfishly demanded that everyone work for her good and for the good of the empire. It left him with a bitter feeling. He understood that in this world, no one owes anyone anything, but seeing Serena in such a situation was hard for him. He knew Serena had been through a lot. Like him, she was probably tired of all the chaos, the constant struggle, and the need to live up to everyone's expectations. So it's no wonder he reacted so strongly to everything that was happening. When they found themselves in Olivia's room, he was agitated, perhaps even more than he would have liked to admit. Olivia, however, didn't try to hide the truth. She admitted that she had indeed placed many expectations on Serena, guided by her own intuitions and desires. And of course, she couldn't help but notice the imperial jewel glittering on the foreign prince's finger. It didn't leave her indifferent, and she couldn't resist a caustic remark. The prince understood perfectly well what she was talking about, but he found it unpleasant when imperial aristocrats or anyone else tried to exploit Serena for their own ends without regard for her own wishes. The prince wondered if there was another way to keep the nobles under control without resorting to force and pressure. He wanted to come up with something more subtle, yet still effective. Remembering the dragon's heart, he suddenly realized it could be the key to solving his problem. The thought sparked in his mind, and he decided to act. He turned to Lady Serena, suggesting that they keep Lady Olivia at a distance for now. He thought that would be wiser given the current situation. Serena listened attentively when the prince suddenly suggested playing a prank on the noble house. Since it was its members who were constantly causing trouble, he wanted to teach them a lesson. However, Serena didn't immediately understand what the nobility had to do with it and looked at the prince with obvious bewilderment. She expected an explanation, as his idea seemed unexpected. Seeing her reaction, he only smiled. Serena realized the prince simply needed to let off some steam. Apparently, this was something personal for him. Then she asked how exactly he planned to trick the nobles, since he clearly had a specific plan. She decided to hear his plan out. The prince explained that before arriving in the empire, he had accidentally heard a curious and even intriguing piece of gossip that he found useful. It turned out that the noble house secretly ran its own casino. This establishment played an important role in the lives of the aristocracy and attracted many visitors. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary place of entertainment where noble guests could relax, enjoy the atmosphere, and gambling. However, this casino had one very interesting rule that made it stand out from other similar places. Members of the imperial family were strictly forbidden from visiting it. The doors of this establishment were closed to them under any circumstances. Serena remarked that she had been there once before. She was told that the ban was in place to avoid diplomatic conflicts and unnecessary rumors. But targeting this location was dangerous. The prince must understand that such actions could have serious consequences. Of course, destroying the establishment that the nobles had spent so long building would be a tempting solution, but it was too risky. In this fight, they can't rely solely on brute force. If they strike first, they'll receive an equally powerful response, which could damage their position. This could even have negatively impacted approval of their marriage. However, the prince hastened to assure that he had not proposed destroying the casino by force. Serena was amazed and immediately asked what he was planning. Then the prince replied with a smile that he was simply planning to take the casino from the nobles. He spoke again about the dragon's heart, hinting that it would help bring his plan to life. Leaning over, he began whispering his plan to Serena. She sighed heavily. It seemed like it was time for her to trade in her profession as a duchess for that of a jewel thief. The Duke of Zenith's residence was a place Serena rarely visited, and her sudden visit couldn't help but surprise her host. He was certain she had a serious reason for such an unexpected appearance, and prepared himself for a conversation. The prince came with her, making the situation even more intriguing. Serena, with a slight smile, expressed surprise that her visit could seem out of the ordinary. Did anyone really need a special occasion to meet an old acquaintance? Besides, he'd recently attended their ball, and entertaining guests was a perfectly normal and natural occurrence, so her presence here shouldn't have raised any questions, if not for one important detail. However, today's visit had a completely different purpose. This wasn't just small talk or a friendly get-together. Serena had come here to find out something important that required an immediate answer. She was interested in one thing. Was it true that the dragon's heart, which she had given to the noble house, was now in the hands of the Duke? She wanted to hear the truth from his lips. The Duke noted with a slight smile that his lady, as always, was perfectly well informed. Yes, that was indeed the case. He had been asked to ensure the safety of the precious stone, and he had accepted the responsibility. Serena was almost certain of it. She noted that she'd considered another option. After all, it would have been logical to leave the artifact with the Marquis of Tortona, who officially represented the noble house. The Duke nodded, agreeing that this seemed the most appropriate option. However, the others were convinced that Serena would try to destroy the dragon's heart if it ended up in the Marquis's estate. Serena couldn't understand why they still perceived her as a threat. Apparently, they were still afraid of her influence, and moreover reluctant to approve of her engagement, which only confirmed their true feelings. She quietly whispered to the prince that no matter where they hid the stone, if she decided not a trace of it would remain. Her voice was confident, her words laced with unwavering determination. The prince merely chuckled at her words and reminded her that they hadn't come to steal her heart, but simply to find out the truth. However, Serena didn't see much difference between these actions. Suddenly, a noise outside the door caught her attention. Someone was persistently pleading for something, but the words were unintelligible. Someone was clearly trying to obtain permission or an agreement. A voice behind the door spoke of jewels. The man insisted that while it wasn't a dragon's heart, it was a pink diamond, and therefore its value was just as great. He tried to persuade his interlocutor to allow the stone to be auctioned. Serena listened carefully, realizing that something important was hidden behind this scene. She turned to the prince and asked if he heard the same thing. Furthermore, the conversation was clearly about the pink diamond, which only heightened her suspicions. Meanwhile, the Duke turned his gaze to her and asked if everything was all right with her grace, as if noticing her thoughtfulness and interest in what was happening. Serena replied that she wasn't looking at the hairs with any particular interest. She simply thought they looked especially beautiful in the sunlight outside the window, like a painting come to life. The Duke remarked that if he had known of her arrival in advance, he would never have allowed anyone else to stay with him at that moment. He seemed to regret the other person's presence. Serena was surprised and asked if there was anyone else there. The Duke confirmed her suspicions, but added that he doubted she would be happy to see them. As they entered, her gaze immediately fell on the man sitting at the table cards in his hands. He seemed completely immersed in the game and didn't even notice their arrival. The man, hearing footsteps, raised his head and asked who it was. At first, he couldn't make out the guest due to the distance and the dim lighting in the room. But as Serena drew closer, he finally realized who stood before him. Surprise crossed his face. Standing before him was the Grand Duchess of Artes, whom he hadn't expected to hear about, much less see. It was the Marquis of Tortonhead of one of the influential noble houses. The Duke looked around and noticed that the living room had become unexpectedly cramped for everyone present. The Marquis, looking at Serena, noted that they had indeed not seen each other for a long time. He apologized for any rudeness, as the meeting had been unexpected. He would have gladly greeted her properly, but the years had taken their toll on his body. He could no longer rise as easily as he once had. Serena didn't comment on his words, only noticing Prince Ricardo's odd reaction. He looked puzzled by something. At that moment, the Marquis turned to Lady Serena and uttered a cryptic phrase. "The dragon's heart is hidden in a glass." His voice was serious, his gaze intense, but as soon as he finished speaking, he noticed Serena suddenly walk away without saying a word. This surprised him quite a bit. The others were also amazed when she confidently walked up to the basket of apples and without hesitation took one in her hand. She turned to Ricardo and calmly but firmly told him to step aside. Serena grabbed the apple and threw it with all her might at the glass display case. There was a loud crack. The glass gave way under the impact, and shards flew in all directions, revealing the statue hidden within. A sudden uproar erupted around the room. The men immediately began screaming, realizing the glass was broken. Someone panicked and shouted that the Duchess seemed to have lost her mind. Others worriedly muttered among themselves that the flying shards might have injured one of the guests. The Marquis who owned the statue jumped up, his age forgotten. He peered anxiously into the broken display case, trying to discern his treasure, the dragon's heart. Was it still intact, or was his greatest treasure irretrievably lost? It seemed the old man had never moved so quickly. Before Serena, watching him, chuckled. She feigned curiosity and asked, was he really complaining about his health? After all, if he could stand up so easily, then standing up for her as a sign of respect wouldn't be so difficult. Now, perhaps the Marquise will finally realize that he didn't greet her respectfully enough last time. Perhaps he'll do it properly this time. Sometime later, Serena was already sitting at the card table with Prince Ricardo. The room was oppressively silent, broken only by the rustling of cards. The prince felt the tension and awkwardness growing. Trying to somehow diffuse the situation, he cautiously asked if Serena was all right, as she seemed thoughtful and silent. She didn't deny it. Physically, she was fine, but the events of the evening were still swirling around in her head. She hadn't expected to run into old courtiers in this place, people she didn't want to deal with at all. But despite the unpleasant encounter, she was able to do what she wanted. She checked the statue. Now her task is complete, and the nobles might even be forced to admit their own ignorance and apologize, however insincere. She believed she could deal with their defensive magic fairly quickly. Sure, it was advanced, but not so advanced that it would pose an insurmountable obstacle. This magic was powerful, but still inferior to Serena's own abilities. The nobles still had a long way to go to reach her level. Remembering this, Serena suddenly became thoughtful and mentioned the voice they'd heard in the hallway earlier. It seemed vaguely familiar to her, as if she'd heard it somewhere before. Ricardo suggested it might be Baron Rado. However, Serena frowned and decided to clarify, as she wasn't entirely sure who exactly they were talking about. The prince reminded her of the young man they had met at the countess's literary soiree. Back then, the man had been brazen and clearly trying to provoke a fight. Serena tensed. Yes, now she remembered. It was the same one who had provoked the prince into a fight, and then been stunned by his response, a strange coincidence. She knew that even in the kingdom of Arena, pink diamonds were incredibly valuable. They were rare, extremely rare, and the fact that the Baron had such a precious stone was quite unexpected. However, something else was more troubling her now. Thinking back on everything that had happened, Serena realized she had essentially destroyed the dragon's heart. If the Baron truly possessed such a treasure, the consequences could be grave. The prince merely shrugged. He wasn't sure if Serena had read the latest gossip, but rumors had it that the Baron's gambling addiction had left him with a huge debt. The Baron was so burdened with debt that he was forced to sell almost all of his property. Rumor had it that his only remaining possession was a pink diamond, the last vestige of his former wealth. The prince suspected the Baron's appearance at the literary soiree was no coincidence. He assumed he had come not for art at all, but to try to secure another loan. Serena noticed a strange discrepancy. Officially, the Baron's pink diamond was reported stolen, but at the Duke of Zenith's estate, the Baron himself insisted that he was going to auction it off. Stolen goods are impossible to sell, but the prince insisted there was no theft. The Baron pawned the stone for money, but subsequently spent it landing himself in an even deeper financial hole. The lady wondered why the Baron wanted to sell it quickly and secretly. She suggested that an anonymous sale would create the impression that the stolen diamond had suddenly surfaced at auction. At that moment, the prince unexpectedly threw a shawl over his mistress. She was surprised by this gesture and didn't immediately understand why he did it. Ricardo explained that she might be cold as her dress seemed too light. He simply wanted to make her feel more comfortable. But the lady assured him that she was feeling fine. The only thing she was missing was a heart. However, the prince seemed to genuinely believe that even the slightest breeze would make her tremble. Realizing his mistake, the prince apologized. He admitted that she was, of course, much stronger than he had imagined. The lady could not understand why her answer was so cold and stern. At such moments, it seemed to her that even a fake heart was better than no heart at all. Then her thoughts turned to the difference between a real heart and a fake one. Suddenly, she understood how they should proceed. The prince didn't immediately understand her hint, so the lady explained. They needed to change their plan a little. He must convince the baron to sell the pink diamond and deliver it here. Once they have the stone, they will replace it with a dragon's heart. Serena was absolutely delighted, as she hadn't been here in a long time. The place looked much more impressive and grandiose than she remembered. Everything seemed updated and sparkling. Nobles from all over the region, even from neighboring kingdoms, flocked here, making it clear that business was thriving here. Serena was certain the place was generating enormous profits. Ricardo remarked that he hadn't expected her to come here so often, to which Serena replied that she'd only been here once, and not that often. She wondered how he'd figured that out. Since Eric appointed her as his assistant, she hadn't been invited here again. This was surprising, as she was used to receiving invitations to such events. He held her hand, and she noticed that now, he even dared to take her hand in his. It was different from before when they were just acquaintances. She told him to take a look at himself, as he seemed unaware of how much he'd changed. Ricardo pointed out that they needed to get inside. The auction would soon begin. Serena agreed with him, because time was really pressing, and she thought that she needed to hurry so as not to miss an important event. They walked inside and were warmly welcomed. The first lot was a true masterpiece. Lake Rado, a magnificent landscape by a renowned artist from the central region. The starting price for this piece was 5,000 gold coins, and everyone present began to watch with interest as the bids rose. Suddenly, someone offered 10,000 coins, and everyone turned to see the Duchess. Her ambition was obvious. She clearly intended to secure a prominent place at the auction. The aristocrats were convinced that she would seek revenge for the years they had shunned her, and that today she would seize every lot, making it clear to everyone who she was. Ricardo noticed that her aspirations were in line with her ambitions and expectations, and he was confident that she would not stop there. The next lot was a magnificent emerald necklace. A bid of 7,000 gold coins was immediately offered for it. Everyone was discussing who would buy this most valuable item. Ricardo complained that his arm was starting to hurt from constantly lifting it, and asked Serena to help him by raising his arm a little lower to make it more comfortable to trade. Serena apologized and explained that she couldn't contain her energy in such a situation. She was simply overwhelmed. They finally reached the main lot. It was the final lot of the auction. One of the only two items of its kind on the continent. Serena realized it was the very lot they were here for. The main purpose of their involvement was the pink diamond, and now that she saw it, her suspicions were confirmed. This was the very jewel they had talked about so much. Many began to say that it was the heart of a dragon, but everyone knew that this diamond belonged to Baron Rado, who was famous for his collection of rarities. However, everyone soon remembered that the diamond had been stolen, and the public's reaction to its appearance was strange. The prince peered into the crowd and spotted Duke Zenith. A servant suggested to the duke that the gem most likely belonged to the baron. The duke remarked that the raven had likely managed to auction it off with someone's help. The prince was sure that, as expected, Duke Zenith could not remain indifferent to such an important event, and his reaction betrayed his interest. Serena noted that the duke would quickly realize that it was they who had helped the baron, and expressed doubt about how high the price of this unique diamond could rise. The auctioneer added that doubts could arise regarding the authenticity of such a rare and valuable item, which made bidders monitor the bidding even more closely. The continent's top appraiser is present at the auction today, and his word will be decisive in confirming that this stone is indeed a rare pink diamond. This wasn't just a gemstone, but a genuine diamond, as the expert, a highly skilled professional, himself declared. But the presenter noticed the man's strange look and immediately asked him about any potential problems. The man was shocked, realizing it was most likely a dragon's heart, which put him in an extremely difficult position. He hadn't expected to encounter such a discovery at an auction. The host couldn't understand why the process was taking so long, so she addressed the guests, saying that the stone's authentication seemed likely to take much longer than planned. Serena then intervened confidently, stating that she knew exactly what was in her jewelry box and offering to have someone explain what was going on. After careful examination, she realized that this was indeed the very same dragon heart that she had once given to one of the noble houses. Everyone present was shocked by this discovery. Serena in turn decided to figure out how this stone had ended up there and what it was doing at the auction. On the third day of the auction, the lady never expected events to unfold so quickly. She was prepared for anything, but not for this turn of events. Baron Rado's diamond ended up in the mistress's hands. The prince, observing what was happening, noted that he was merely following the mistress's orders, and nothing more. Baron Rado, in turn, stated that it did not matter to him whether the stone was sold or broken. The main thing was that with its help, he could take revenge on the noble house. The baron said that some low-ranking aristocrats were treated with the same contempt, and he could not tolerate it, and therefore sought ways to take revenge. He even apologized for his behavior, explaining that his mistress had been unaware of his intentions. She now realized that the noble house had far more enemies than she had imagined. The prince asked if she could share her future plans with him and tell him what she was going to do with this precious stone. The siren replied that they would first make the baron's diamond look like a dragon's heart, and then they would switch them, replacing the real stone. Using her magical abilities, she will make it so that no one can distinguish the stones, and will even cast an illusion on the duke's residence until the auction is over. And when the next dragon heart goes up for auction, everything will begin to unfold. This event will attract the attention of everyone who follows such things. People will think the nobles are trying to sell the precious stone they gave her. Soon suspicion will arise, and the house will be accused of stealing the precious diamond. By the time the ram's diamond falls into Duke Zenith's hands, the rumors will become even more widespread. Everyone will think they stole the baron's precious stone. As a result, the noble house will come under pressure, and they will be called thieves, and all this will mean one thing. It's time for the mistress to act. She will have an opportunity to prove her strength. The lady will become like a phantom thief, and that's exactly what suits her. Prince Ricardo was delighted, because everything will go according to plan, just as she had told him earlier. The prince was confident that everything would be exactly as she said, and he would be able to provide it to her. Serena had planned to act completely differently, concealing her actions. On the first day of the auction, the Duke and she will decide to strengthen security. After her visit, security methods will be upgraded, causing a host of problems for anyone attempting to enter. While the enhanced security measures would make everyone nervous, Serena wasn't one to give up easily. Her goal was already clear, and she was prepared for any obstacle. Like a seasoned thief, she slithered past all the lasers and reached the dragon's heart. Her movements were flawless, and she acted with astonishing dexterity. Serena grabbed the gem, lifted it, and walked out calmly. She didn't even break a sweat, despite her swift and decisive actions. But just as she was about to return, she suddenly heard strange sounds. She became wary and realized that someone had entered the room. It was the maid who entered the room, not expecting to find anyone there. She had no idea that her actions might disrupt Serena's plans. The maid approached the statue, checked the stone, and sighed with relief when she saw that everything was in order, but she knew nothing of what had happened here recently. Serena was alarmed when she realized the maid might have noticed something was wrong, but she managed to hide the fake by placing it in the deer's forehead, and everything remained under control. Serena held the real dragon heart in her hands again, but now she couldn't understand what the maid was doing in the room at this moment. Her actions seemed strange. She saw the maid climb up to the statue and remove a stone. Serena was shocked and couldn't understand why this girl was doing all this at such a late hour. The girl stood there completely bewildered, watching what was happening. She couldn't comprehend what was happening and was shocked by the maid's actions. Serena watched the maid from around the corner, unsure what she was going to do next. Everything that was happening seemed strange and confusing to her. Suddenly, the maid heard screams and panic. People started looking for her. She could be anywhere, and every corner of the palace was under close surveillance. Panicked, the maid quickly placed the stone in her pouch. She was frightened and unsure of what to do, but she felt the need to leave as quickly as possible. Serena realized the girl had simply placed a fake gemstone in the statue, trying to cover her tracks, but why she had done it remained an open question. When the maid was asked what she was doing in the hallway on such a night, she replied that she had gotten lost and had decided to change her plans slightly without specifying any details. The mistress wanted to know who the maid was, but her answers didn't clarify the situation. Now, the statue didn't even contain the pink diamond, only a cheap fake. Serena decided it was time to cast another illusion spell on him to control the situation. She was confident she could manipulate everything to her liking. Despite the difficulties, she managed to obtain the dragon's heart, but that wasn't all. Now she had to deal with the maid who could become a threat later. Now that everything was in place, the time had come to put their ambitious plans into action and make them a reality. Serena was ready for the next step. At the auction, she couldn't resist asking how they could put her gift up for sale. It was simply impossible, as the item was too important to her and her loved ones. Prince Ricardo watched the scene with a smile. His gaze couldn't help but appreciate how Serena had transformed the situation into a true performance, demonstrating her mastery. The auctioneer tried to calm Serena, stating that the appraisal of the item was not yet complete and everything would be decided later. Her words were intended to calm her. Serena then approached the jeweler responsible for the appraisal. She demanded that he clearly and honestly explain what he really saw before him. The man a little nervously admitted that the diamond actually belonged to Arena and that it was the heart of a dragon. These words caused genuine shock among those present. The entire aristocracy was thrown into confusion. People began whispering surprised to realize that a gift from the Duchess of Artez had been auctioned off and no one even knew about it. Suddenly, men burst into the room, shouting and looking for the Duchess. Everyone realized the situation was getting out of control, and panic broke out among those present. The man, noticing Duchess Artez, flew into a rage. He'd ordered that no one let her in, and now it was becoming a serious problem for everyone. The servant noticed Duke Zenith suddenly stand up and head off somewhere. Everyone noticed that he was clearly about to take action. His demeanor became more determined. Prince Ricardo also noticed the Duke begin to move toward the exit. He realized he was plotting something and watched him trying to figure out what would happen next. Serena thought the Duke was probably going to check if his precious dragon heart was missing. That could be the reason for his concern. The presenter and the male evaluator, looking at Serena, felt she looked like an angry dragon. Her gaze was filled with fury, and it was impossible to ignore. The appraiser suddenly said he'd just remembered important matters that required his immediate presence. It seemed like an excuse to leave. The auctioneer announced that the situation was escalating and the casino was on the verge of collapse. At that point, she insisted that everyone begin to leave the premises. The lady thought these people were simply cowards, and then suddenly someone addressed her. She immediately sensed that the situation was unfolding unexpectedly and demanded attention. She turned to see Colton, the establishment's manager. He looked slightly agitated and clearly unsure how to react to what had happened. He offered his deepest apologies, explaining that he had been informed of the tragedy but had not expected it to be so large-scale and serious. Serena calmly told him not to worry and to forget about it. She knew the noble house would be held responsible for everything that had happened. Duke Zenith wasn't far away yet, and Serena decided to use this opportunity to secure approval for her marriage. It was time to act, but suddenly, she heard a familiar sound, one that had once caught her attention. It was something important, and she intuitively knew she needed to act. Serena realized it was nothing more than a heartbeat growing louder, as if something important was underground, hidden from their sight. Prince Ricardo approached her from behind and quietly asked what had happened. He noticed that she looked worried and wanted to understand what was going on. Serena calmly replied that the heartbeat belonged to one person, and it sounded so loud as if everyone around was very nervous and worried. She asked the manager to explain what was going on with this casino, because she felt like there was more going on there than just randomness. The man trembled with fear and said he had no idea what she was talking about, but the prince noticed that their reaction was clearly hiding something. Serena felt that Ricardo also felt this strange atmosphere, and confirming her suspicions, added that he did not feel it as strongly as she did. The source of this strange phenomenon was somewhere beneath our feet, something like a weak earthquake, but so insignificant that it would be difficult to notice. Serena confirmed her suspicions with a serious expression and added that there was definitely something in the basements that shouldn't be there. With each step, the jolts grew stronger, causing Serena's heart to beat faster. The manager tried to stop her, assuring her there was nothing there. But she wasn't about to stop approaching the bookcase. She said that's where the strange vibrations were coming from. It was obvious to her. Serena stopped right in front of the closet, and the prince, noticing her determination, wanted to help her, realizing that the situation was becoming increasingly tense. The manager insisted that if the lady continued to interfere in their affairs, they would not stand aside and would immediately take action, but this did not stop her. She ignored his threats and simply smashed the cabinet to find out what was hidden inside. She was ready to go all the way, despite all the obstacles. Serena said she'd be delighted if they invited a few inexperienced fragile boys who'd never fought before. Let them come. She had no objections. She decided she needed to figure out what was really going on here and uncover every hidden detail of the situation. That was her plan, not to miss anything important. When she pulled the closet aside, she noticed that behind it was a basement with a staircase leading down. This was unexpected, but it intrigued her even more. The further they descended, the louder the sound emanating from somewhere below became. The mysterious noises grew more and more intense, and it was alarming. Even with the soundproofing barriers installed, the noise was impossible to ignore. It permeated everything, leaving no peace. The lady hoped that such a long and strange journey would not be in vain, and that their expectations would be fulfilled. She hoped that it all had meaning. Ricardo said that while she was busy with the auction, he managed to eavesdrop on the nobles' conversations and learned something important that could shed light on the situation. The lady, hearing this, became intrigued and asked what they were talking about. Ricardo replied that he didn't know the details, but that those who had been to the casino more than 10 times received keys. This key opened the way to a secret place inaccessible to ordinary visitors. It became clear that something important was hidden here, and it needed to be discovered. That explained why she and Eric hadn't known about it. Apparently, there were people who knew much more than they did. The prince noted that Serena seemed to sincerely believe that Her Majesty was unaware of these events. This left him dubious, but he didn't object. The lady fell silent, but then admitted that she didn't rule out the possibility that someone might have simply been pretending and hiding the truth. Perhaps everything was not at all as it seemed. The prince, intrigued, asked if she was sure he noticed something strange in the air, as if something important were hidden in this place. The lady paused for thought and replied that she would like to see what this door concealed and what secrets it might reveal. It was too curious. When she opened the door, a massive coliseum appeared before her. It was unexpected and completely different from what she expected to see behind closed doors. She couldn't figure out what exactly was going on there and told Ricardo to take a look too. Something unusual was clearly happening there. Ricardo noticed that they'd even managed to create an artificial sun here using magic, which was impressive. Magic was clearly at its best in this place. She noticed a man holding a bull and realized it was a bullfighting arena. It all seemed unimaginable in this modern world. She thought that such entertainments were long gone, that they were something from ancient times, but what she saw contradicted her expectations. But the prince suddenly told her to pay attention in that direction. He noticed something important that Serena might have missed, and she looked carefully there. He pointed at something, and when Serena looked, she saw a strange sight. There in the distance was something that surprised her greatly, and she immediately felt uneasy. Prince Ricardo noted that even in the distant past, people had more morality and humanity. He wondered how the situation had changed in his time, and what had become of those values. A child stood there holding a red rag, and a bull stood nearby, its gaze filled with fury. Everything that was happening seemed strange and dangerous, and the situation was escalating. Serena couldn't contain her anger and screamed that all these people were absolute lunatics. Her eyes burned with rage, and she couldn't understand how they could act like this. She screamed for them to stop this madness immediately, and everyone around froze in fear. At that moment, the aristocrats felt the true horror of what was happening. Many didn't understand what Duchess Artez was doing there and couldn't explain why she was there. Everyone was perplexed, as no one knew she was there. Very few knew that the imperial family had access to such events. People were convinced the matter was carefully hidden, and no one was supposed to know about it. The manager tried to calm the crowd, but people began to panic and quickly leave, and the bull in turn began to break free from its chain. The tension in the air grew increasingly tense. The bull broke the ropes and charged headlong toward the defenseless child, standing with the red rag. Chaos reigned, and the situation grew increasingly dangerous. Serena felt her anger only grow, the noise of the crowd fueling her fury. She realized this child was in grave danger and had to act. She decided to jump down to save the baby. Serena didn't hesitate. Her instincts and desire to help took over, and she was ready to risk it for the sake of another's life. Prince Ricardo was horrified to see what Lady Serena was doing. He couldn't believe his eyes, and his fear intensified when he realized she had decided to do such a thing. The bull was already very close to the child, but Serena managed to intervene. She grabbed it and managed to fend off the attack at the last moment, saving the baby from terrible danger. After she rescued the child, Serena asked him again if he was okay. She wanted to make sure he was safe and that he hadn't been hurt in that horrific moment. She asked the boy to wait, and holding on to the bull, tried to prevent further attacks. Her arms were strong, and she decided not to retreat to protect him. Serena had never worked with animals like this before, and this was her first experience. Despite this, she set about the task with determination, trying to gain control of the situation. She knew she had to use her power to convey a message to the animal. This was her chance to prove to herself that she could handle such an unexpected task. Everyone who witnessed it couldn't believe how docile the bull was. Everything around seemed completely incomprehensible, and no one could explain how this was possible. Serena turned to the child again, asking if he was okay, and offering her hand to help him up. She couldn't leave him in this state of fear. The child was panicked, and when he saw her trying to help him, he suddenly started running away. He was too afraid to understand her intentions or trust her. Serena didn't understand what was wrong with her, and when she looked at her hand, she saw that she was still holding the bull. It stunned her a little, but she couldn't stop. Meanwhile, Ricardo had managed to reach Serena and immediately asked if she was okay. He was concerned about her condition, wanting to make sure she was okay. Serena responded that they urgently needed to find a safe place for the child who was nearby. She was determined to ensure his safety first and foremost. Ricardo offered to take on this task so she could focus on more important matters. He believed she would need to seriously discuss the situation with the nobles. Serena agreed, but warned that the conversation would begin with a serious blow, perhaps even several. This was a moment when tough decisions could not be avoided. While they were talking, the child continued to cry. Ricardo, without missing a beat, approached him and offered him a handkerchief, trying to calm the baby. With a smile on his face, the prince asked if everything was okay, with the boy showing his care and attention to every detail, trying to distract the child from his fear. The boy, despite the handkerchief, continued to doubt, and looking at the prince asked what would happen to him now, what to expect from what was happening. Ricardo confidently replied that there was no need to worry now, because his safety would be ensured, and he did not need to worry. The boy said that he could not leave alone, but the prince reassured him, explaining that the lady they were with was very influential and would be able to help them. The boy didn't understand what exactly he was talking about and clarified that that wasn't what he had in mind. Ricardo asked curiously what exactly he meant. The boy explained that there were other children too, who had been abandoned elsewhere and who needed to be picked up as well. This opened up a new problem they hadn't been aware of. Serena asked in horror what she had just heard. Her face expressed shock and alarm, as the situation was becoming far more complex than they had thought. The boy explained that many children had been brought here with him. This information only deepened his anxiety, as their lives were now in danger. The prince asked the boy to tell him where his friends were, so they could take action quickly. Time was precious, and every step mattered. The boy pointed at the cage, where the other children were saying they were there awaiting rescue. His eyes were filled with concern for the others' fate. All the children were crying, creating a terrifying sight that left no one indifferent. The scene was horrific, and everyone knew they had to act immediately. The prince told the boy that if he passed this test, his father's debt would be cancelled, and their destinies would change for the better. The imperial family might not even know about this place. Serena thought it was strange that someone could commit such terrible acts. It was beyond comprehension. She asked irritably where these nobles were, who were clearly hiding something. Her voice was filled with alarm and anger. She couldn't understand how this was possible. In desperation, she screamed for an answer. Her voice was filled with rage, and she warned that if they didn't tell the truth, the consequences would be dire. One of the boys seemed confused and asked who this woman was. He noticed her strength and power, making her simultaneously terrifying and powerful. Ricardo explained with a hint of sadness that she was his savior. He didn't hide his respect for her, realizing how much she had done for him in that difficult moment. However, he added that she seemed in no hurry to reciprocate his feelings. Ricardo felt a slight disappointment, not understanding what was stopping her from revealing her feelings. These words, spoken with such sadness, made the boy curious and ask what had happened. He was genuinely interested in their relationship and motives. Ricardo, perhaps with a slight smile, replied that she had told him everything and he should forget about it. The boy didn't know how to respond, but he sensed a hidden pain in her response. The boy finally pointed out the direction they needed to go. He knew the way and was ready to lead them, despite all the dangers that lay ahead. Ricardo hurried after him, but suddenly realized these children had clearly been here for more than a couple of days. Their anxious eyes and demeanor spoke volumes, and he felt sorry for them. He looked at the children, realizing they were terrified, perhaps on the brink of despair. They hadn't expected anyone to come to their rescue. It was a hard realization. Ricardo remembered the moment when he himself was in the same situation, without hope of salvation, when he was just an object for experiments, and no one could help. He remembered being subjected to horrific experiments, and he was helpless in the face of it. All he could do was endure and remain silent. this pain remained in his heart. Suddenly, the boy's question brought him out of his thoughts. He asked if everything was okay. Ricardo returned to reality and replied with a smile that he was fine. The children noticed them and curiously began asking if the boy had really defeated the bull. Ricardo, with a slight smile, replied that he hadn't. He explained that it wasn't he who had won, but rather that a noblewoman had saved him. The children hearing this immediately realized she was much stronger than they had thought. Ricardo added that she would come soon to free them. He tried to give the children hope that their suffering would soon end and they would be saved. The boy was so impressed by her strength and power that he immediately believed in her ability to help them. He knew this woman would be their savior. Cyrena, holding back her surprise, asked if Duke Zenith meant to claim that he knew nothing about the arena that was taking place, which was so important to everyone present. He would soon become the new head of the noble house, and the Duke clearly hoped she would believe his words. It seemed he genuinely thought she would take them at face value. The Duke confidently declared that he hoped she understood that from a high position, it was impossible to notice every detail happening below, but his logic was questionable. He was sure she shared the same opinion. However, her perspective on the situation went much deeper than simply ignoring it. He spoke of the events that occurred immediately after the war's end, as if they were the key to their entire conversation. He was trying to justify his actions. He noted that after the end of the war, she actually locked herself in her mansion and declared that imperial affairs no longer concerned her, saying that she no longer cared about it. Approaching her, the Duke added that he had learned important information on the way here. He said the children in question had given written consent to participate in the bullfight. The gentleman noted with a smile that if that's the case, they couldn't be blamed for anything, as they participated voluntarily. He also added that this fact should be taken into account. He couldn't resist hinting that if she was here because of that dragon heart, then she should also know that these children actually took part in the battle. However, the lady, unimpressed by his words, declared that she had no interest in this stupid stone heart. She saw no point in this undertaking. Her face expressed disappointment. She was tired of all these excuses, as if everyone had to answer for what happened around them and take full responsibility. All she felt was deep disappointment. She was tired of the struggle and the fact that it all went on without end. Nothing had changed. She turned and, looking at Ricardo, asked if he had found the children who meant so much to her. She was worried that they would be okay. Ricardo confidently replied that he had already found the children and they were now safe. He had done everything to ensure they were in the right place at the right time. He glanced at her and, unabashedly concerned, asked if she was sure she was leaving things as they were and not interfering. It was a serious question. Cyrena confirmed her conviction without hesitation. She was absolutely certain that destroying this place would solve nothing, but would only make the problem worse. Ricardo, openly curious, asked what the lady had discussed with Duke Zenith. He hoped she would reveal what had passed between them. His gaze was wary. The siren replied that perhaps he already knew how many people she had killed in the war. It was no secret, and everyone knew the mark she had left in those battles. She thought she could be more useful if she simply didn't interfere, didn't do anything, and simply stayed out of it. Sometimes she considered that a wise decision. But when she thought about it, she came to the conclusion that her inaction only made her a witness, an indifferent observer, and further increased the suffering of those who suffered. She was at a loss. She couldn't find the right solution. She didn't know what to do, how to act, to even slightly correct everything that had been done. Cyrena, unable to contain her curiosity, asked Ricardo why he was still with her. After all, she had destroyed his country, his people. Why did he continue to stay by her side, despite everything? Ricardo calmly replied that the lady had never been a mere bystander. She had always fought, and her actions were always for the greater good, even if they sometimes led to dire consequences. He added that she had fought alone for too long. She was always alone without support, but her struggle was not in vain. Everything she did was for something important. As for him, all he wanted was to be with her. His desire was simple, and that was what mattered most to him. He knew that with her, he could be whoever he wanted. He promised to be by her side until she decided how to move forward. He had no intention of leaving her alone and was ready to support her no matter what. Cyrena turned away and said this because the prince had managed to deceive her into believing that he could be honest, even though she doubted his intentions. She noticed that for a moment she even succumbed to the illusion that she had become a good person, but deep down she knew that this was only a temporary weakness. Prince Ricardo wasn't someone to be trusted, especially after everything that had happened. It was hard to believe he could be sincere in his words. He said she had saved the child, but Serena wasn't sure if his words reflected genuine gratitude or concealed something much more complex. She also took the time to listen to Lady Olivia, who came to her for help and stood up for her friend despite all her fears. She had saved Prince Ricardo before, though it was not something she would have done of her own free will. It was a forced decision. All her actions were aimed at doing a good deed, but she often had to doubt how much her actions really helped those around her. She decided to agree, but said that she still did not understand what exactly he meant when he spoke of his salvation, because his words remained confused. Then the prince fell silent and added that, thanks to her actions, he would now be able to do what he himself had always wanted, freed from his past. He also noted that he would now be able to live freely without being bound by the walls of the laboratory as before, and this seemed to be a welcome change for him. Serena replied that he should be more grateful to his mind, since it was his desire for knowledge that had gotten him into this situation. In any case, she insisted that all the children who were with him go to her estate. Ricardo asked what she intended to do with them. Serena said that, first and foremost, she wanted to give the children a real holiday that she believed would not only be fun, but also meaningful to them. She truly organized a grand celebration where the children could have whatever they wanted, everything prepared, especially for them, by her best chef. The boy she saved was absolutely delighted, as he had never seen such delicious food in his life, and his eyes sparkled with happiness. The lady supposed it might be because she hadn't seen children in a long time, but this boy was so sweet that she was simply shocked by his innocence and charm. However, when she noticed the lady looking at her strangely, she decided to intervene and told him to eat. The girl immediately felt awkward and frightened. This made the boy feel even more uncomfortable, frightened, and said he really didn't need anything. He tried to avoid unnecessary attention, not wanting to embarrass everyone. The lady couldn't understand what was so strange about this boy. She was confused, not understanding the meaning of all this excessive politeness and refusal to eat. The boy explained that he was afraid of dirtying the table, which turned out to be a girl. She admitted that she didn't have the money to compensate for the damage and felt awkward. All the other children agreed to stay on her estate, but the girl still insisted on her decision. She couldn't understand why she had to stay there. It seemed she couldn't persuade her with food. She'd have to speak frankly and settle the matter. The lady understood she had to find another way to change her mind. She remarked that she'd heard her younger brother Connie was ill. This struck a chord with the girl, and she realized that this was precisely why she needed the money for treatment. When the girl heard this, her eyes lit up, and she said it was true. Her family needed help, and she was very grateful to Serena for her support. The girl knew Serena had given the family the sum that was supposed to be her reward for the bullfight. However, she was still grateful, despite her difficult situation. But since the problem was solved, she now decided that she would like to return home, since there was nothing keeping her here anymore, and the decision was difficult to make. The lady replied that she thought it was completely impossible. She looked at the girl with firmness in her voice, deciding she wouldn't let her go so easily. All this was an order, and after these words, the mistress looked at the girl with a menacing gaze. She left her no choice, firmly deciding that she would stay. Apparently, the girl still thought that her previous owners, who sold her to pay for the treatment of their second child, would welcome her with open arms. The girl couldn't contain her emotions and burst into tears. The lady, observing this, extended her hand and asked why she didn't stay there. She suggested the girl consider this a favor she would have to pay for later. It was an offer she shouldn't refuse. The girl hesitantly asked if she could consider the proposal. The lady replied with a smile that of course she needed time to make a decision. The girl stole 2 cookies from the table, trying to do it discreetly. She was too shy to eat in front of others, afraid of appearing impolite. Despite her shyness, she tried the cake anyway and was absolutely delighted with its taste. It was a moment that made her forget her worries. The cake was so delicious that she couldn't believe she had ever eaten something so wonderful. It was absolutely extraordinary. She was delighted because she had never tasted anything like it in her life. The taste was so wonderful that she couldn't even hide her admiration. The lady replied that she expected only one thing from her: to help the child she currently is in the future. This is her main request, and she hopes it will be fulfilled. Until the girl grows up, she can quietly ponder this in her mistress's estate in a comfortable setting. There she will have time to reflect and perhaps figure out what she truly wants. The girl was with a man, but she felt genuine gratitude to her mistress for her kindness and care. Her heart was filled with many emotions, but gratitude came first. Ricardo said she was fighting for a good cause, but in reality, she was searching for a piece of humanity in her heartless body, trying to find her soul and the meaning of life in this cruel world. However, if her actions truly help others achieve a brighter future, she will continue on this path despite her struggles. She believes her sacrifices are not in vain. She thinks that maybe this path isn't the best way to live, but maybe it's the only path for her until she becomes a normal person capable of living differently. At least until she finds her inner peace and becomes a human being, not just a creature trying to survive in this cruel world. The siren turned everything on its head, stunning everyone. Not only the casino, but also the arena became the center of attention. It was an unexpected turn that no one expected, but everyone was talking about. The Duke confirmed that the gentleman had asked how she had learned of them, and why now. This was important information that required careful analysis, and everyone began to consider the possible consequences. Eric noted that they'd managed to keep her in the dark all this time, but now it seemed the situation was changing, and the uncertainties were beginning to clear up. Everything was becoming more complicated than it seemed. The Duke noted that Prince Ricardo seemed to already know about the bullfighting arena. This revelation raised many questions about his role in the events and what he was really hiding. The Duchess was aware of the Dragon Heart incident, which also attracted attention. This incident was a significant event that could not go unnoticed and was bound to have consequences. Immediately after the incident, she suddenly learned about the arena. This fact made everyone wonder if she might have some connection to the event and if her actions might have ulterior motives. Eric pondered the situation. He felt the information wasn't sufficient to draw any conclusions, but something still bothered him. He needed more time to understand what was really going on. He said they should continue to monitor her. This decision was made to find out more, as everything seemed confusing, and every new move could reveal new important details. The Duke also asked if he could find out what they should do about their marriage. This was an important question, as much depended on how they would proceed in the future, given all the new circumstances. Eric noted that given the current situation, their only option was to quell her anger by approving of Ricardo's actions. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it seemed the most reasonable under the circumstances. The Duke apologized to His Majesty. It was a gesture of respect and recognition, because the situation demanded formality, even if not everyone was happy with what was happening. Eric noted that his opinion didn't matter all that much. Everything had dragged on longer than he'd expected. Even without the incident with Arena, he would have had to approve their marriage around now. However, in this situation, he still sees some difficulties that he does not like, although these are not such big problems. A few months ago, a banquet was held in honor of Prince Ricardo's arrival. It was a momentous occasion, with everyone awaiting his arrival with particular anticipation. Rumor had it that the ladies were discussing with the prince whether he would be willing to be the Duchess's partner for their first dance. This became the talk of the market, sparking widespread interest. Prince Ricardo then said the Duchess had honored him, and this of course caused a sensation. Everyone was delighted with how everything turned out. Prince Arena, he recently went out onto the balcony with Serena, and the event left no one indifferent. Eric had been closely watching what was happening all this time, but he could not understand why the prince had returned alone and where Serena was now. Eric would have been glad to know what they'd been talking about. Ricardo looked very smug, and that made him uneasy. After all, Ricardo was only the prince of a ruined kingdom, and his behavior did not seem justified to him. The prince approached His Majesty and greeted him politely, which also did not go unnoticed. Eric noted that this was another moment worthy of attention. Eric thought he might be the only one who had ever been given the honor of dancing with a sword, though of course that wasn't entirely true. It was still an important opportunity. Moments like these are rare, and he should have cherished this opportunity. It was a chance that doesn't come around twice, and he couldn't miss it. The prince, despite all the persuasion, said that he was grateful for the opportunity, but at the same time, he would like to make his own comments that could change the situation. From that moment on, Eric would face a far greater honor than he had expected. Everything only became more complex and important. Here is an expanded version of the text, preserving the structure and plot, but adding details. Eric was a little surprised and thoughtful. Perhaps he really was right, and what he said made sense. He himself hadn't expected everything to turn out the way he said it would. But as he got closer, Eric said that time would tell how long he could maintain his confidence. It all depended on how things unfolded in the future. Eric couldn't believe he'd underestimated this prince so much. He'd expected him not to last long, but he was clearly wrong, and it came as a real surprise. He hadn't expected their union to be so strong and long-lasting. It had taken much longer than he could have imagined, and that puzzled him. Olivia called Ricardo and said with a smile that they should see how the noble house not only approved of their marriage, but also promised to return the dragon's heart. They sat at the picnic, savoring the moment. Ricardo, looking up, remarked that this was excellent news and truly inspired them to keep fighting. Now that they'd sorted that out, he suggested they start looking for her heart. After all, it was an important step that needed to be completed before they could move on. But Ricardo reminded her that they needed to have the wedding first, and she immediately realized she'd completely forgotten about it. Indeed, the wedding was the next important step. He added that perhaps she should rest a little today. She'd spent too much time with the children since returning from the arena, and she needed some rest. The lady couldn't help but agree. She had indeed spent all this time with the children, trying to understand their problems and offer them support upon returning from the arena. She said she was actually trying to convince a very straightforward child of an important decision. The prince remarked that she made the child very happy. But Serena quietly added that her patience with the children had already run out. She wasn't as attached to them as many might think. She planned to find a separate place for the children and someone to watch them. This would allow her to get some rest and not worry about what was going on around her. She was sure that at least one of these children would one day repay her in kind. They might not realize it now, but one day it would all come back. Then she asked Ricardo what he thought about it. It was interesting to know how he perceived her decisions and what he thought of her plans. Ricardo replied with a smile that perhaps he himself had come here to repay her. That could have been precisely what prompted him to approach and talk to her. The lady was surprised. She looked at him and asked what he was even talking about. His statement seemed odd, and she found it difficult to understand his point of view. Ricardo replied with a slight grin that he thought it all sounded like nonsense. He hadn't expected her to take his words that way, but his gaze remained serious. The lady immediately declared it complete nonsense. There was no hint of sincerity in his eyes, and she realized he didn't believe what he was saying. For a moment, she even thought Ricardo might be in love with her. It was a strange and slightly disconcerting moment, but she decided to ignore it. The prince, returning to his thoughts, reflected that she really could be too perceptive at times. She could see much more than he was willing to reveal. Then the lady, noticing his expression, said she could feel his heartbeat. She asked if he heard it too, since her intuition told her something was wrong. Serena tried not to think about the possibility of a bullfighting ring hidden in the cellars of her estate. It was something she didn't want to consider, despite its possible reality. The boy couldn't understand why his heart was beating so hard, but he didn't answer the question. He felt a strange uneasiness, unable to understand the cause of what was happening inside him. At this point, his attention was drawn to the lady, who, smiling, said that it was his heart that was beating so violently. She noticed this and understood that something was bothering him, even without words. He suddenly said that he needed to return to the imperial court, believing the time had come. However, his words sounded a little tense, as if he himself was unsure of his actions. Lorne, not immediately understanding what was happening, decided to ask Ricardo why he was in such a hurry. The prince explained that staying so long in her residence would be inappropriate and would be considered poor manners. But Serena couldn't understand it. Unable to comprehend his motivation, she grabbed his hand, trying to discern the true meaning behind his words and actions. She looked at him in surprise and asked what he meant by leaving in such a hurry. Her expression was perplexed, and she didn't know how to interpret his behavior. They had received approval for their marriage, and Serena couldn't understand why Ricardo couldn't stay here in her house. Everything had already been decided, and there were no obstacles to it. The prince was deeply embarrassed by this unexpected question. He felt his face flush, and he didn't know how to respond to such a straightforward request that had taken him completely by surprise. Serena, in turn, told him to just stay by her side. She saw no reason for him to continue leaving, and her words were filled with a sincere desire to be with him. He was already staying in the guest room, and she was sure he shouldn't worry so much. She assumed it was just a formality, and he could stay longer. He remained silent and decided not to pursue the matter further, though after a while, he did admit that he didn't want to stay there. His words rang with a hint of desperation, and he didn't know how to explain it. Serena was surprised by his confession, but she understood that it was really up to him. She had no intention of forcing him to do anything against his will and respected his feelings in this situation. She continued to say something, but Ricardo interrupted her. He said she had misunderstood him. He didn't just want to stay for a while, he needed something more. It was all much more serious than he explained. The prince wanted to stay here for a long time, and it was important to him, but he couldn't find the words to properly express his feelings. Serena, hearing his words, couldn't contain her emotions. She began to loudly protest, rolling on the floor, trying to comprehend what had happened and her own feelings at that moment. Ricardo couldn't understand why the lady was laughing. She explained that if he had seen his face, he would have realized she was just teasing him a little. He couldn't understand how she could laugh at such a reaction. He was upset because he thought she was just playing a joke on him, but in reality, it was funny. He would have happily stayed by her side. He would have felt much calmer if he could spend more time with her and share his thoughts. But everything was a little different. She told him to stop worrying, to relax, and to lie down next to her. The scent of autumn was already in the air, adding a touch of tenderness to everything. They met in the spring, and since then, time has passed so quickly that they did not even have time to notice how quickly it was leaving behind only memories. Ricardo noticed that she seemed to want to rest her head on his arm. The lady merely smiled and confirmed her wish, saying it was no problem. Ricardo said that of course he wouldn't mind, and if anything, he would wake her up at the right moment so that she wouldn't sleep too long. His hand was firm, and she fell asleep peacefully in it. She couldn't even remember the last time she had been able to allow herself such carefreeness. Ricardo watched her with interest. He liked her calm and relaxed manner, but it bothered him a little as he didn't want to disturb her. She recalled the moment when she lay on her friend's lap. It had been a long time ago, and she remembered how cozy it had been despite the circumstances. She was on a bench then, and when she stood up, everything seemed a little strange but pleasant. She recalled it with a smile and a slight thrill. Her friend remarked that she'd had a wonderful nap. She wondered when she'd wake up as lunchtime was drawing to a close and time was running out. The lady said her legs felt like a pillow. She asked curiously what their next lesson was, hoping for something interesting and not too difficult. The friend replied that the next lesson was math, and as always, the old man would be teaching. She even noted that the same reaction would be felt for this lesson. She laughed, insisting she wouldn't fall asleep now having slept through the entire break. She felt refreshed and ready for the next lesson. Although after eating the pork cutlet, she felt a little nauseous, and she thought that maybe it wouldn't be so easy to concentrate this time. Then the guy noticed the chairman's niece, and immediately felt that this could be an important moment. Hei Yan was untouchable. She broke the rules so often that even the teachers didn't dare mess with her, considering her completely beyond the reach of punishment. Serena's friend overheard a conversation in which someone was discussing how often she spent time with Hee Young. She claimed that under her influence, she was constantly chatting and doing nothing. Serena's friend came closer and hugged her. She reminded her that they needed to hurry if they didn't want to be late. Time was running out, and they needed to act quickly. Everyone in the class watched Serena as she dozed off. They laughed and whispered, making her the butt of their jokes. It wasn't pleasant, but nothing could be done about it. You knew perfectly well that falling asleep in class was too much for her. She always knew there would be consequences for such actions, but she continued to break the rules anyway. At that moment, Serena felt calm as she watched her friend. However, her peace was shattered when the teacher approached and turned his attention to her. The teacher didn't linger. He walked past and approached the main character sternly, telling her to wake up immediately and stop acting as if this were her home. Serena felt a strong sense of dread upon seeing the teacher and hastened to reassure him that she was no longer asleep, but her voice was hesitant, as if she wasn't entirely sure of her words. The gentleman remarked with displeasure that she was probably preparing to enter college, but she was clearly mistaken if she thought that sleeping in class could help her in that endeavor. The girl continued to apologize to the teacher, and her friend Lorne supported her, discussing her constant problems with her attention in class and her poor academic performance. Many of their classmates knew that Serena worked nights as a courier to make ends meet. It was a heavy burden, but there was no choice. It was said that after her parents died, her uncle took everything they left behind, and now Serena lived in poverty, trying to survive in this cruel world without any support. The teacher sternly ordered everyone to shut up and mind their own business. He wasn't about to waste time on idle chatter, so he continued the lesson without interruption. He also addressed Hee Young, noting that she too should pay attention to her actions and behave more respectfully towards others. Serena's situation was no excuse for inaction, and she had to pull herself together. The teacher urged her to take her studies seriously. The teacher continued to express dissatisfaction with how often the children left without parents, were distracted during lessons. He believed this was a serious behavioral problem. He couldn't understand why everyone remained silent and turned a blind eye to her behavior. It was truly unacceptable, but no one dared to express their opinions openly. Serena couldn't understand why her friend was being so harshly criticized. She felt something unfair was being said behind her back, and she wanted support. Suddenly, she heard Lorne standing up for her, saying that her orphanhood and difficult situation left her with no chance of a better future. It wasn't her fault that she was this way. Serena, thinking about this, decided to approach her classmates. She couldn't understand why they were silent, even though she felt they knew more about her family than she did. She noticed that her classmates didn't respond to her words, as if they hadn't even been listening. This intensified her feelings of loneliness and misunderstanding. But then she saw one of her friends, Lorne, start to smile. It was a different, more welcoming smile, one that brought her a little comfort. Serena smiled. Though she didn't particularly care at the time, she'd simply accepted the situation and didn't think it would affect her mood. But often the thought crossed her mind how great it would be to live like Hee Young, her best friend, and be as kind and caring as she was. Her dream was to be born into wealth so she could help others, just like Hee Young had helped her, by changing her life and giving her care and attention when she needed it. However, everything changed on that tragic day when the accident occurred, and Serena was reborn. She was never able to save her friend, which tormented her. She always thought that if she had a chance to find another friend as wonderful as Hee Young, she would be truly happy. At that moment, Serena wondered if there was anyone here who could be her friend, because she felt lonely and in need of support. She watched Ricardo closely as he slept, unable to understand how he'd managed to fall asleep. He'd promised to wake her, but it seemed he'd forgotten. She couldn't understand how Ricardo could even fall asleep, because she clearly remembered that he promised that he wouldn't let her fall asleep until they talked. Serena approached Ricardo and asked if they would still be together even after she got her heart back. She didn't know what that meant for him. She wondered why they couldn't just be friends if they had already spent so much time together and had so much in common. She was a little stunned when she learned that Ricardo was returning to the palace. This meant their conversation had likely been put on hold. Ricardo, however, pointed out that he shouldn't disturb Lady Everything regarding the engagement had already been decided, and they had finally received approval for their relationship. He suggested she take a few days off, but Serena only laughed. She knew his words were hiding something deeper, something he didn't want to talk about. To be honest, Ricardo was worried that if she were around, she would figure out his true feelings. He wasn't ready to open up to her completely. A few minutes ago, he heard her say that if her heart were found, she would want to be friends. The word friends shocked him. Ricardo was horrified to hear this. He hadn't expected her to speak so seriously about friendship, and even more so, he didn't know how to react. She kept insisting that all this would happen later when he was asleep, and couldn't hear her. But in reality, it was important to her to have a friend like him. This was a real shock for Ricardo. He knew she was always happy when he stayed, but at this moment, everything was completely different. She said goodbye to him, seeing how upset he was, and at that moment, the butler approached her, showing no signs of concern. Serena was surprised when the butler announced that His Majesty the Emperor wished to speak with her personally, although she did not expect this. The lady was puzzled and could not understand why the Emperor was calling her, and the prince, hearing this, thought about the reasons for such a call. She simply agreed, deciding that she needed to prepare for a visit to the palace that clearly couldn't have been planned without a special reason. She quickly packed her things, but in her heart, she was not entirely satisfied with the upcoming meeting, feeling a slight anxiety. Serena had already arrived at the palace and was beginning to lose patience, not knowing how much longer she would have to wait since she had been invited. After some time, the Duke approached her and said that His Majesty was already waiting for her, which made her feel a little awkward. The lady replied with a smile that it was wonderful, but her eyes involuntarily rolled back in slight irritation. Erica, noticing her arrival, greeted her happily, feeling relieved that she had finally come. Serena asked him why she needed to meet such an interesting man as the Emperor, not hiding her curiosity. Eric pointed out that she probably had a lot more to do, and she agreed with his words, because it was indeed true. So much had happened in the last few days: wedding preparations, the casino incident, and many other matters requiring her attention. If the aristocrats had not committed the crime, she would have wanted to sort out the situation and find out the truth from Eric. She hoped that Eric wasn't aware of what was going on at the casino either, which made her feel a little more confident. She mentioned the casino, hoping that he would somehow clarify the situation that was increasingly troubling her. Eric just smiled and remained silent, as if not wanting to delve into the topic, explaining that he was the emperor and knew much more. He said that he had ears and eyes everywhere and often had to keep abreast of the most varied events in the empire. Serena asked seriously why he didn't intervene if he knew what was happening and why he didn't stop the incident at the casino. In response, Eric explained that the place was frequented by members of the aristocracy from different nations, and no one could say for sure who was involved. He noted that no one knew who might be involved, since everything took place within the framework of an informal meeting without any obvious violations. Moreover, all the victims had signed consent forms to participate, and they would have had a difficult time in court, which added to the complexity of the process. So he decided that if the aristocrats could pay large compensations, it would be better than taking them to court. Serena noticed that Eric didn't mention children at all, which surprised her a little, since it was an important issue for her. Eric was surprised by her disappointment, not expecting that this moment would be so important for the lady. Serena replied that it was indeed so, and turned around to ask if he had really invited her just for that reason. She decided they had nothing more to discuss, and as she started to walk away, she felt Eric try to stop her. Eric grabbed her hand and said that he did not agree with her decision, not wanting her to leave. Serena heard Eric say he must have lost his mind. He started saying something strange about her future husband, Prince Ricardo, which couldn't help but alarm her. Eric claimed the prince already knew about the event in the arena and had deliberately brought her there. Serena was shocked as she was hearing about it for the first time and didn't know what to think. She couldn't believe his words, remembering Ricardo's face, which had seemed innocent and kind. But now, everything looked completely different, and she felt uneasy. Eric admitted that he hadn't bothered her before because he thought she would soon tire of the cunning man surrounding her. He thought she would quickly lose interest. However, now that she was clearly not tired, he had to change his tactics and be more persistent. Things were not going at all as he expected. Serena was completely shocked. She asked if she was mistaken about what Eric had just said. His words seemed completely absurd and out of place. Eric added that he wasn't asking her to love him, but at least hoped she would appreciate his actions as a prince. He wanted her to acknowledge his efforts. But Serena brushed it off, claiming she didn't understand what she'd once seen in him. She'd never considered him worthy of attention like Ricardo had been. She admitted that a few months ago she hadn't even thought of him as someone she could be, with Ricardo was much more important to her. And she knew for sure that if she ever fell in love, it wouldn't be with Eric. He wasn't someone she wanted to be in a relationship with. His feelings didn't resonate with her. After that, she hurried out. Serena had no intention of staying, as she had come for other reasons, and was not at all interested in this conversation. She looked up and saw Ricardo standing before her. Her heart skipped a beat, and her face grew slightly embarrassed. She hadn't expected to see him here. She felt her head spin. It was clear the prince had come with some important message or news, but something in his demeanor made her wary. Ricardo, noticing her surprise, said that he had arrived at the imperial palace and that the first thing she should have done was look for His Majesty, not her fiancé. He didn't understand her strange behavior. Like any government, the state has its own strict rules, and he expected her to follow them. The prince assumed that being in the imperial palace, she would surely know about these rules, just like everyone else. He believed she should have been aware. He also asked how long ago she had begun observing these strict rules of etiquette. She found his questions strange and unexpected. He was too serious. Serena couldn't understand what was happening to him. Why was he pressuring her so much? Ricardo was silent, his eyes full of thought, and she felt uneasy. In his silence, she remembered his words about how he shouldn't fall in love with her because it would be a burden to her. It was like a reminder of something important. Serena had told him not to fall in love with her, but now she realized he couldn't hide his feelings. He couldn't tell her how he really felt. And that was the moment when he admitted he wanted her to look only at him, but of course he couldn't say it outright, hiding his vulnerability. He said he didn't know himself, he was just very confused. A lot had happened today, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. He didn't know what to do, so he just kept quiet. Serena remained silent in response, recalling her conversation with Eric again. He'd asked her if she truly knew he'd known about what was happening in the arena, and had deliberately brought her there. She didn't understand why he hadn't told her the truth. Did he have some explanation for his actions? He should have. What reason was there to hide it from her? She continued to look at him, unsure of what to say. Finally, she asked him how he even knew she was here in this place. It was strange and unexpected. The young man replied that he'd accidentally encountered the Duke in the hallway and that he'd told him about it. He added that he felt Ricardo was trying to make him jealous since he was her fiancé. Ricardo cleared his throat and then said that since his conversation with Her Majesty had come to an end, he assumed she was planning to return home. He was prepared to let her go if that was what she wanted. But Serena replied that wasn't true. She wasn't planning on leaving right now. His reaction surprised her a little, and she decided to tell him straight out that her plans were completely different. Ricardo was surprised and asked if that was really true. He hadn't expected such a turn of events and thought perhaps she was hiding something. This struck him as odd. Serena explained that she needed to stop somewhere to run some errands. She couldn't just leave right away. It wasn't as simple as he might think. She had her own reasons. She came to Olivia, who didn't hide her surprise. Olivia remarked that Serena's visit was completely unexpected, and it could easily be called a surprise to everyone. Serena said she needed to discuss something with Lady Olivia, and it was truly important. She understood her visit might be unexpected, but it was necessary. Olivia paused, trying to imagine what this could be about. Her mind was full of questions. The uncertainty of the situation bothered her, and she couldn't figure out what was behind this visit. Serena stated that her decision remained unchanged. She had no intention of changing her plans despite everything that was happening. Her goal was clear, and she was ready to move forward. Olivia was slightly upset and expressed her regret. She said she was very sorry that everything had turned out this way, but she understood that Serena had followed her convictions and couldn't blame her. Olivia was touched that Serena had still left her kitten to meet her. It hadn't been an easy decision, and Olivia appreciated her efforts. That spoke volumes. Serena wasn't quite sure what kitten they were talking about, but she answered with a smile anyway. She said it actually looked more like a fox cub than a normal kitten. She remembered what her pet looked like. His personality and appearance were strange, and now that she thought about it, she could almost see him waiting for her return to her chambers. Serena noted that in any case, she'd probably heard rumors about children fighting bulls in the arena. These rumors couldn't leave her unmoved. She expressed a desire to discuss this particular topic, as it was what concerned her most. These children seemed to be the key to some important issues she wanted to raise. Olivia, listening to her, remarked that she'd thought Serena had previously claimed she was only interested in her own life. She hadn't expected her to suddenly be thinking about the children's fate. Olivia wondered if Serena, like many aristocrats, was trying to pretend she wasn't concerned with such matters. However, her words sounded sincere, and she wondered why. Serena admitted that perhaps she had once been indifferent to such matters, but now everything has changed, and these children are in her residence, requiring her attention. She could have solved the problem herself, but she knew that wouldn't guarantee that other children wouldn't find themselves in the same situation in the future. She was looking for more than just a temporary solution. Olivia remained silent, listening to her words. She couldn't understand why Serena was so certain she needed to handle this matter and not leave it to others. She asked if Serena really wanted to share the responsibility and do this with her. Olivia wasn't sure she was ready to take on such a commitment. However, she could not understand why the Duchess was reluctant to seek help from others, especially from Ricardo or the Emperor, to find a solution to this problem. Olivia believed that Her Majesty the Emperor could offer some solution, and even Prince Ricardo, despite his position, could help in such a matter. Serena simply smiled and replied that unfortunately, Eric wasn't interested in helping her. She realized she needed to take a different approach than simply expecting help from others. She added that Prince Ricardo, although a significant figure, would still be unable to offer a solution. She reminded Olivia that the state's affairs should be more important to her than her personal problems. Serena emphasized that there must be a stake in the fate of the state and its future. She is confident that Olivia should think about this more seriously than about two men. She spoke about how the Empress could have much more influence in high society than anyone else, and this opened up great opportunities for her. That is why she asked Olivia for help, as she considered her the only one who could influence the situation and change it for the better. The ladies discussed the invitations they had received. It was a momentous occasion, and each of them understood that such opportunities were rare. They talked about how it was practically impossible to enter high society without such meetings, and these invitations could be decisive for their future. The lady noted that she was fortunate to attend the previous meeting and that this gave her a wealth of experience and new perspectives for further communication in secular society. And at that moment, Serena realized that no one was more suited to the role of Empress than Lady Olivia. All her qualities, charisma, and determination were perfect for the position. At one meeting, Olivia confidently stated that the imperial family and the nobles, despite the scandals, could turn a blind eye to the exploitation of children in the arena for higher purposes. Everyone present was shocked because her speech was so convincing and beautiful that no one could doubt the truth of her words. She spoke with genuine inspiration. Olivia also organized a charity auction for children who were victims of this terrible phenomenon. This only reinforced her image as a wonderful woman with a big heart. Everyone believed her actions would truly change the future. Even her potential childhood wasn't an obstacle, as she strove to help these children, and this inspired many. Soon, public reaction began to gain momentum, and people began to support her. She was confident that the choice she had made was the right one, and everything would work out as it should. But Olivia noticed that her support was not only sincere, but also strategic. She used the moment to take a step forward, strengthening her position. Serena had previously stated that she had no interest in the empire's politics, finding them too convoluted and cruel, but now she's begun to change her mind, realizing the reality of what's happening. It seemed Serena had finally joined Olivia in her fight for reform. Together, they could change the empire for the better, and this was becoming increasingly clear. Serena knew there was some truth to her words. Even if she doubted it, it didn't matter. Now Olivia was determined to change everything. She hoped Olivia would become empress, and with that teach a lesson to all those who exploited the empire's weaknesses for their own ends. It would be a momentous occasion. Olivia noticed her plans were beginning to unravel. Her companion and ally understood what she was really up to, but she still remained reserved in her statements. However, Olivia replied that in the end, her success was that she became the first woman to judge under the ducal title, and she was proud of it, despite all the difficulties. Rumors of a bad relationship between them circulated around town, creating some confusion. People didn't expect them to be so openly together so openly. Many thought no one would suspect that they could stroll so calmly together. In the public eye, it seemed impossible, but in reality, things were quite different. Serena was delighted to see the apples and inquired how much they cost Olivia. However, noticed that she wasn't just buying them, but also trying to negotiate the price, offering 5 coins instead of 3. The seller laughed and said that the prices at the market had now risen so much that Serena didn't even realize how much they had changed, and her offer was naive, but still funny. When Serena finally bought the apple, Olivia approached her and remarked that she was a rather unusual person. She said all this with a hint of reproach and curiosity. Serena thought Olivia was saying that because she didn't understand how a duchess could haggle with street vendors, that she thought was truly odd. Olivia also noted that sometimes she wonders how Serena can walk down the street so calmly, as if she were just an ordinary person, oblivious to her status. Especially when she walked along paths where no one had trodden before. It all seemed unusual to everyone who knew her. Olivia thought it was because Serena was constantly faced with this situation, and perceived it as normal, unlike other people. Serena, slightly embarrassed by her words, turned away, not expecting anyone to notice her behavior like that. She had never thought about it. She didn't think her actions could be so unusual, because for her, it was just part of everyday life, especially around people like Lorne. The thought occurred to her that to the locals, her daily life might seem completely unusual and alien. Olivia often felt her life was much more difficult than Serena's. Her war had been more difficult, and she had faced problems that were foreign to the Duchess. Serena decided to talk to Olivia about the deer statue she'd donated to the noble house. It was an important point that interested her, and she wanted to discuss it. She also mentioned that the idea of swapping a cheap ruby for a diamond was brilliant. Olivia taught her some new tricks that proved useful in her work, but Olivia didn't quite understand what exactly her friend was talking about, as she didn't know all the details of what was happening. This left her a little puzzled. Serena explained that she had been trying to find out who exactly had sent the spies to switch the stone, but things weren't moving as quickly as she expected. One of the moments that led her to the solution was an early trip to her mansion, where she met a familiar face who helped solve the mystery. Nevertheless, thanks to her persistence, she was able to find out who was behind this incident. This was crucial for her further actions. Serena asked Olivia what she was going to do with this information, but she believed that her friend already had a plan to resolve all the issues. However, Serena said the situation wasn't as simple as Olivia thought. Duke Zenith was convinced it was she, and no one else who did it. Olivia was surprised. She believed that this situation arose precisely because of her intervention, but she couldn't understand what exactly had aroused the Duke's suspicions. But Serena replied that she shouldn't worry about Zenith's suspicions. The important thing was that Olivia had stolen her heart, and that was worth discussing. The girl noted that her motivation was very similar to that of Serena. This made her reflect on how often people pursue similar goals without realizing it. The Duke was confused, unable to understand where the diamond had disappeared to. He couldn't explain why the precious stone had been replaced by a cheap ruby, which greatly perplexed him. Olivia hoped to use the ruby situation as a blackmail plot. Her plan was to stir up trouble among the nobility and weaken their influence. Serena extended her hand to Olivia and said that if she had known about love earlier, she would have definitely asked her to dance on her engagement day to celebrate this moment. Olivia rested for a moment, then remarked that if she were to live, she wouldn't object to such a friendship. It was her gentle consent to continued communication and support. Serena hoped that next time Olivia would honor her by agreeing to dance. She was certainly looking forward to this moment, and she was confident her friend wouldn't refuse. The lady eagerly awaited the day when they could dance together. The thought delighted her, and she was already anticipating how their first dance would go. When Lady Serena returned, the servants noticed she was quite late. This didn't escape their attention, and they immediately decided to find out what could have kept her. The lady replied that the conversation with Lady Olivia had dragged on a bit. It was a sincere explanation, and she saw nothing unusual in it. She hadn't spoken to someone who understood her like that in a long time, so she lost track of time. At one point, she was surprised at how quickly time had passed. But the servants reported that nothing important had happened, although unexpected guests had arrived. This caused a slight sense of unease, as guests can always change the atmosphere. With disdain, she asked again who these unexpected guests were. The butler informed her that they were the Emperor and Prince Ricardo, which surprised her even more. When Serena saw them in the distance, she became thoughtful. It seemed the two were now united, and this changed all her future plans and expectations. Eric looked at her sternly, and without further ado demanded a choice, either him or this prince. His tone was cold, but his voice was filled with unwavering confidence. Ricardo, smiling reservedly, didn't fail to remind her that he was Lady Serena's fiancé first and a prince second. His voice was firm, and he clearly had no intention of giving in. Serena didn't understand the point of this choice, or why she had to make it at all. The situation seemed absurd to her, since she wasn't striving for anything serious right now, and the reasons for the conflict were unclear. The prince calmly explained that all she needed was to say who she wanted to spend time with at the moment. He seemed to be making it clear he wasn't going to pressure her, but he was still waiting for an answer. Serena paused. If she was being so insistent on choosing, then so be it. She confidently declared that she would choose this maid. Her words came as a surprise to everyone. The maid started in surprise, looking at her mistress with wide eyes. She clearly hadn't expected to find herself in this strange argument at all, and the surprise left her completely at a loss. Serena explained that because she and the prince had been here so long this morning, the maid's workday had been extended. Now she would have to spend more time on chores, and that was unfair. Eric frowned, not understanding where she was going with this. Serena added that if the conversation wasn't urgent, they could continue it tomorrow, but for now she was going to bed. The emperor was stunned by her words. How could she speak to him like that? Was it possible to show such blatant disdain for the emperor? He couldn't believe he had been ignored. Serena didn't offer any further explanation. She calmly turned and, without looking back, walked away with the maid, leaving the men behind. Her decisiveness and indifference surprised everyone. She didn't understand why the emperor was so insistent on this. Didn't the ruler of a great empire have more important things to do than argue with her? He wasted his time on such trivialities. This situation stunned her. Did he really have no other concerns than interfering in her personal decisions? His behavior offended her, and deep down she felt it had hurt his pride. Emperor Eric watched the girl closely and concluded that she was simply unbearable. Her character, behavior, and manner of communication, all of it irritated him to the core. He was sure that Prince Ricardo also shared his opinion, so he gently nudged him with his elbow, as if hinting at mutual understanding on this matter. However, Eric noticed how the prince abruptly and quickly pulled away from him, as if he wanted to avoid even casual physical contact. This struck the emperor as rather odd. Then, Ricardo calmly but firmly declared that his body belonged only to Lady Serena. He could not allow just anyone to touch him thoughtlessly, especially in such an informal setting. If the emperor wants to tell him something, then it should be done exclusively within the walls of the imperial palace, where such conversations would be more appropriate. Eric didn't react to these words at all, didn't even show surprise. He saw no point in wasting emotion on such statements. During the evening banquet, he reminded the prince that he was willing to do anything for Serena, so now he wants to know if Ricardo's opinion on the matter has changed. The prince merely chuckled slightly and said that since the emperor was so curious, he would receive an answer tomorrow. He had no intention of rushing things. Ricardo also confidently added that Serena would dine with him. He had no doubt about it, and left no room for any other option. He was firmly convinced that his wife would always be by his side, and not by Emperor Eric, no matter how influential he was. The next day, Serena practiced fencing with her fiancé, perfecting her skills. This had become a regular practice for them. Ricardo asked her not to limit herself to using just one hand. He wanted to see her full strength and skill. Serena just smiled slyly instantly, assuming a fighting stance, and then launched a decisive and lightning-fast offensive. The prince quickly realized that she was vastly superior to him. Her speed, agility, and strategy left him far behind. He was stunned Serena was truly crazy, but it was precisely this crazy strength and audacity that made her special. He noticed that only the glove remained in the air, but he had lost sight of Serena herself. He had no idea where she was now. The next moment, the girl appeared behind him, and without hiding her satisfaction, said that this was where he should have looked for her. Then, looking at Ricardo, she noticed that it seemed like he had lost, as his sword had completely melted in her hands. The weapon couldn't withstand the blue flames emanating from her. This was true magic beyond the reach of many. Serena suggested they call it a day, not wanting to hurt her future husband again, even if he was prepared for it. Ricardo agreed. At that moment, Serena decided to ask what he wanted to talk about yesterday, and whether there was really a compelling reason for his visit. The prince replied with a smile that engaged couples often see each other, even if there is no special reason or special occasion. These words surprised Serena. She wondered if he simply wanted to put their relationship on display for all to see. But in the end, she accepted his point of view, saying that their wedding was already close, which meant it was worth paying attention to preparing for it. She enjoyed admiring Ricardo's face, so she looked at him again carefully, as if memorizing every feature. Her intense gaze made the prince feel slightly embarrassed, not understanding why she was behaving so unusually today. He even wondered if it was possible that the lady felt the same way about him as he did about her. This thought made him uneasy. Soon, Serena asked him an important question. Had he known about the arena and the casino from the start? This moment haunted her. She did not understand how the prince, being from another country, could find out something that even she herself had not suspected for a long time. She also wondered when exactly he had received this information and why he had chosen not to tell her anything earlier. Ricardo didn't beat around the bush and admitted it straight out. He knew about it even before he first met Serena. At that moment, Eric was watching them, curious about what they were conversing about, so closely, standing so close to each other. However, his thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected sound. A large bird flew over him, somehow attracting his attention. The emperor was surprised. He couldn't understand how Ricardo could have guessed that he was there watching them. The bird arrived bearing a letter, which Serena noticed immediately. It bore the seal of Rita, Queen of the neighboring kingdom of Arena, renowned for her mystery and power. Eric couldn't figure out what exactly the letter from Queen Arena meant. He studied it carefully, but the contents left him confused. After a few short conversations where they discussed current events, Lorne suddenly felt a strange sensation, as if someone was present nearby. Turning around, she saw Eric standing there, watching intently. It was a little surprising that he was still there, not interrupting their conversation. Eric said he didn't come for any special reason, but was simply curious about what these ladies were talking about. Serena replied that there was nothing really so exciting about their discussions, that Eric would be following them. She smiled slightly, but continued. He also noted that their conversation was not yet over, and that they would soon continue leaving the place of discussion as soon as the matter was completed. Eric couldn't understand what exactly was happening, or what these two were planning. He didn't know what lay behind their words and actions. He exchanged glances with Ricardo, and both were stunned by what was happening, not understanding what the secret of this conversation was. Serena and Ricardo sat down at the table, ready for dinner. Their time together was important, but they both knew they needed to discuss more serious matters. She didn't invite Ricardo just to spend time together. Their conversation was about much more important issues than evening get-togethers. Ricardo noted that he understood this, and said that she in turn had noted that the time for these conversations had come to an end. They had important matters to discuss. She still wanted to know how exactly his past connected to the arena. It was an important clarification she couldn't leave unanswered. Ricardo said that he had already spoken about the experiments that were carried out on him as a child when he was used in the arena. Serena remembered what he'd said, and he clarified that the children he'd been involved with were familiar to him. All of these children had gone through the same horrific ordeals. His adoptive mother, Rita Arena, the queen of this very kingdom, brought these children to their country to use them for her own purposes. She also injected them with Ricardo's blood, trying to create something powerful. She believed that this way the children would become dragons. Much time had passed since then, and Ricardo never imagined the arena still existed. He couldn't believe such things still happened. Serena noted that if she had known about what was happening earlier, she never would have asked him to transport those children. It would have forced her to give up everything. This memory must have caused him pain, and she wanted to know why he hadn't told her about it earlier, why he hadn't shared his pain. Ricardo explained that he didn't want her to interrogate him. If she had found out about it earlier, she would have started looking for reasons and details, which is what he wanted to avoid. He also didn't want her to think he was weak and couldn't look at it as his fault, so he tried to keep it all to himself. But Serena was still worried about the Emperor. She wanted to understand how Ricardo knew so many secrets and how it connected with the Emperor. She asked him how he knew about the secret he'd kept so secret. It was a momentous occasion for her, and she was searching for answers. At this point, Eric was already reading the letter, which he doubted he asked if it really belonged to Queen Irina. The servant confirmed that the letter was genuine, and its authenticity was confirmed by the Magic Tower, which is responsible for verifying such important documents. Eric couldn't recall whether this woman had opposed the union between Serena and the prince from the very beginning. However, he knew for sure that she had, so now he was deeply puzzled by why she had decided to give him information about the arena. And now she was declaring that she would approve of this marriage. Her sudden change of heart seemed suspicious, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was some kind of agenda behind it. Whatever she was planning, he didn't yet understand. But one thing was clear: he couldn't count on her candor. It seemed he would have to take control of the situation and act on his own. When the lady turned around, the prince became wary. Judging by her expression, something had happened. He watched her closely, waiting for an explanation, but none came. However, hearing that everything was fine, he didn't insist. If she didn't want to talk, then so be it. So maintaining a neutral tone, he announced that he was leaving. The lady didn't object, but the prince was offended that she didn't even say goodbye. He felt that after everything that had happened, she could have shown more warmth. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was simply disappointed. She probably felt bad that he hadn't dared tell her the whole truth sooner. Serena was convinced she knew Ricardo better than anyone in the entire empire. She believed she could anticipate his thoughts, his actions, his intentions, but just because she'd confided her secret to him didn't mean he'd do the same. The realization hurt her a little, but she wasn't about to show her feelings. That's why she finally decided to speak up. She looked at him and told him bluntly that she didn't want him to go through all this alone. Their relationship began as a pretense, just part of some complex game. They both understood this perfectly well. But now everything had changed. Now they were not just allies, but people united by a common goal. They needed to stick together. Hearing this, the prince instantly blushed. Her words caught him off guard, embarrassing him so much that he couldn't immediately find a response. But before he could say anything, Serena suddenly noticed the carriage arriving. She wondered who might be arriving. Ricardo, following her gaze, guessed that she was probably expecting guests, besides him and the emperor, of course. However, the lady shook her head. No. She hadn't organized anything and didn't know who might be in the crew. The answer soon became clear. A man emerged from the carriage, walked straight toward her, and greeted her politely. Serena frowned. She didn't know who he was, and immediately asked if he'd received entry permission. The stranger immediately assured her that he had, of course, and introduced himself. He was a steward of the Duke of Zenith and brought a letter. From his very first words, Serena was irritated. She knew perfectly well that anything could be expected from the Duke, but she couldn't imagine why he had turned to her now. So without further ado, she suggested they get down to business. The man unfolded the letter and began to read. It stated that the Duke deeply regretted what had happened at the casino and wished to atone for his guilt. As a sign of reconciliation, he throws a banquet in Serena's honor. He hopes she'll agree to attend, if not for his sake, then at least out of respect for their old friendship. Serena was so stunned by his words that she couldn't utter a word. He seemed to genuinely believe that after everything that had happened, she might still have any kind of friendly feelings for him. He even invited her to some unremarkable banquet, as if that would make a difference. Without hesitation, Serena firmly replied that she wasn't going anywhere and had no intention of attending such events. She made it clear that he'd better return to the Duke and tell him there was no need to apologize. However, the man didn't leave immediately, but rather regretfully remarked that he truly was sorry. He then added that many important figures from the empire would be attending the banquet. The future empress would be among the guests, which could make the event much more interesting for her. Hearing this, Serena suddenly became interested. She looked up sharply and asked if Olivia would really be there. Ricardo was surprised by his wife's reaction. He hadn't expected Serena to show such obvious interest, especially when the conversation turned to this woman. Without thinking twice, she declared that if the future empress was there, she was ready to go. Moreover, she immediately ordered preparations to begin. In fact, what attracted her most was the opportunity to talk to Olivia. That was the reason she decided to attend the banquet. But now Serena simply could not understand how she had once again found herself between two men, the prince and the emperor. When they arrived and exited the carriage, both men seemed perplexed as to why they had been traveling together, but it was too late to change anything now. The whole way there, all they did was argue over Serena, and she in turn was even curious to watch it. At one point, she couldn't take it anymore and started screaming, saying that if it weren't for those two, she would have just enjoyed the ride instead of listening to their endless bickering. Eric, hearing her indignation, pretended to care about her and extended his hand, warning her not to trip. However, Ricardo did not stand aside. He immediately repeated the gesture, adding that only he was capable of holding her back because he knew better than anyone how to deal with her indomitable character. The guests watching this held their breath. They were incredibly curious about whom Serena would choose, her fiancé or the emperor. But she in turn merely irritatedly ordered them both to remove their hands. This behavior shocked everyone present. Then she confidently walked out on her own and, casting a condescending glance at them, declared that she was not a little girl and could easily walk without anyone's help. Besides, she'd already arranged to accompany someone to the party, which meant it was time for her to go inside, but they'd better take turns going in. Otherwise, their arguments would simply bring the ballroom down. The prince and emperor froze in bewilderment. If she were to accompany someone else, would that mean they had a new rival? That thought certainly didn't please them. When Serena entered the hall, she approached Lady Olivia, respectfully kissed her hand, and with a slight smile asked permission to invite her to dance. Olivia greeted her warmly, expressing her joy at seeing her again. She accepted the invitation without hesitation. However, before they began dancing, Olivia noticed she couldn't see Prince Ricardo at all. She knew he had arrived with Serena and curiously asked where he was. Serena calmly replied that she'd asked him to come back later. She wanted to see Olivia out first, and she decided it would be wiser to space out their appearances a bit. She then quietly added that she didn't see anything good in them appearing together. It would cause unnecessary talk and attract too much attention. They began to dance, moving smoothly and harmoniously. During one of their graceful turns, Serena leaned toward Olivia and whispered that their appearance together would attract too many unwanted glances. Olivia appreciated her prudence and noted with mild admiration that it was a very thoughtful and calculated act. Serena raised her eyebrows in surprise. No one had ever spoken about her like that before. The comment was unexpected. Olivia, taking advantage of the moment, admitted that she would like to ask Serena one question since she had such an opportunity. Serena became interested and asked with slight curiosity what exactly the lady wanted to know. Olivia warned that her question might not be entirely appropriate, but she still asked, "Does she really love Emperor Eric?" She said this with a slight smile, as if she had already anticipated the answer, but was still waiting for what Serena would say. Calmly, without unnecessary emotion, she added that their union is merely a political partnership based on profit power and money. Like other nobles, they deliberately delayed their wedding, avoiding excessive intimacy in order to maintain a certain distance. At the same time, both skillfully used this alliance to achieve their own political goals, which made their relationship very convenient. This balance gave Eric the support of her family, and Olivia herself enormous influence at court, which allowed her to maintain her position. It was precisely because of this position that she could now calmly dance with Serena without causing any gossip or doubts. She assured Serena that her relationship with the emperor was no more than friendly despite the gossip at court. She shouldn't let rumors influence her opinion. After this, Olivia decided to take advantage of the moment, and in turn asked Serena a question, asking her to answer honestly. Serena didn't object, and then Olivia, bowing her head slightly, asked if she had someone dear to her heart. The lady, with a hint of surprise in her voice, replied that this was indeed unexpected. She hadn't expected such a thing, but noted that Livia would undoubtedly be very eager to know about it. The siren, hearing this, was about to respond, but at that very moment, the announcement of the arrival of His Majesty, the Emperor, and the Prince was heard. Their sudden appearance changed the situation. Contrary to Serena's orders, they entered simultaneously, even though they were supposed to be later. They disobeyed her orders and left together anyway, causing mild dissatisfaction. It seemed their group would have to split up, as His Majesty intended to remain close to Olivia. This arrangement was obvious, but it still created certain inconveniences. Olivia remarked that she'd enjoyed spending time with Serena, but soon turned to her again, wanting to know something important. Her question was quite intriguing. She wondered if any of the recent guests at the Imperial Palace had caught Serena's attention. Was there anyone among them who might have left a mark on her thoughts? Olivia considered this, but couldn't think of anyone in particular. The lady, however, noticed that something was bothering her, as if she had a suspicion, but no proof yet. How could Emperor Eric have information about Irina? After all, this information was supposed to be known only to Ricardo, and no one else was supposed to know it. Olivia admitted she wasn't sure if this concerned Irina. However, she noticed that letters from unknown senders were regularly delivered to the palace. These letters arrive via a magical tower, making them faster than other messages. They arrive so quickly that almost no one notices their arrival. However, the sender remains a secret. Upon learning this, Serena felt the situation seemed suspicious. Too much remained hidden from view. She couldn't figure out who Eric could be secretly corresponding with. This question haunted her, forcing her to mentally run through the possible options. At that moment, another letter arrived. It appeared to have arrived with a recent shipment of messages, and its contents could shed light on the situation. Serena began reading, confused. Why was Eric so desperately trying to stop their marriage? His motives remained unclear. He probably doesn't want to let go of a monster with the power of a dragon. Perhaps for him, this isn't just a question of power, but something more, something tied to the future of the empire. However, be that as it may, Serena and Ricardo's wedding will soon take place, and she will travel to Irina with him. No one can stop it now. There was a knock at the door. Serena allowed them in without taking her eyes off the letter. She was already curious about who could be arriving at that moment. A maid entered the room, bowed, and announced that the king wished to see Her Highness. This was unexpected, but not overly alarming. Serena asked me to tell the king she'd be arriving soon. She knew there was no point in delaying the meeting, but she wanted to deal with the letter first. The next letter was from Emperor Crovia. If anyone had found out about it, everything might have turned out differently, but that could not be allowed under any circumstances. He couldn't learn the truth. It was a risk that could change everything, so Serena carefully concealed any hint of a possible leak. She asked the maid if she knew what the emperor had said when he saw the strange bird that had caught his attention. The moment seemed significant to her. The emperor was struck by her beauty. He admitted he had never seen anything more beautiful. It never even occurred to him that there could be anything more hidden behind this bird. Anyone with even a modicum of intelligence would have realized that this bird belonged to a magical tower. But did the emperor himself realize this? Or was he simply admiring its appearance? Despite all the doubts, rumors confirmed that the one they called the listener really did exist. Moreover, there were rumors that he was a close confidant of the ruler, who had once tried to destroy their kingdom. The lady listened attentively and noted that this wasn't all the information. They say this man has an assistant known as the Genius Artez. If she had wanted to contact the magical tower, she could have done so. However, the queen asked, had the maid ever seen Serena Artez in person? The maid shook her head. She hadn't been present when the Duchess broke the dragon's heart. After that, she was banned from entering Irina altogether. The queen paused. Since Serena had found herself in this situation, it was time to delve into her past, to understand who she had once been. She was interested in everything. Where Serena lived before meeting the emperor what she did, what position she occupied in society. But the search proved fruitless. At first, the queen assumed the duchess was simply skillfully concealing information about herself, covering her tracks. However, the realization soon set in. No information about her past simply existed. There was not a single clue leading to her. It was as if at some point she simply appeared in this world, as if she had come out of nowhere. That is why the main question remained. Does it really exist, or is it just an illusion? Alex shook his head with a smile. You don't quite understand, they'll be talking on the balcony for a long time. He thought it best not to interfere in this conversation. That meant they had something important to discuss. They seem to be genuinely enjoying this rare moment of communication and are in no rush to end the conversation. Emperor Eric couldn't understand where he got such confidence. However, he had known Serena longer than anyone, and that was an undeniable fact. Prince Ricardo was genuinely surprised. At that moment, Eric came closer and remarked that he hadn't known they'd danced their first dance together. Eric asked if she was talking about a girl named Alia, since she was just about to accompany someone. Mistress Olivia frowned slightly, as if remembering something. At that moment, a servant approached her and respectfully informed her that she was urgently needed. Olivia turned her gaze to her interlocutors, said in an apologetic tone that she had important business to attend to, and headed away. Serena was left alone, watching Olivia disappear behind the door. She didn't know where exactly she had gone, but she knew the Emperor's bride had urgent matters of her own to attend to. Eric unexpectedly approached her. He curiously asked who she was planning to dance with for the second time that evening. Had she already planned a partner, or had she not yet made a choice? The Emperor also recalled with a hint of mockery how he'd given in to Prince Ricardo the last time he'd let him steal her first dance. What a shame. Still, it had been his mistake, and he had no intention of repeating it. A thought flashed through Serena's mind. She should find out who Eric was exchanging letters with so diligently. These correspondences clearly had significance to him, and the answer could be quite intriguing. But before addressing that, something more important needed to be decided. He needed to put an end to his feelings for her once and for all, so as not to give her false hope. After weighing everything, the lady decided to agree to the dance. Since his fiancée was so cold to him, it would be foolish not to help the Emperor save face. It was her duty. Eric kissed her hand gratefully, but emotions raged inside him. He was horrified. Did she really feel nothing for him? He suddenly noticed that he couldn't remember the last time they danced together. How much time had passed since then? Serena remained silent, but Eric continued as if talking to himself. It seems like a long time ago, and this has nothing to do with any problems between us, right? Her mood instantly changed. She pointed out that this was precisely the problem. If he had danced with her last time, everything would have turned out differently. After all, that evening was dedicated to her engagement. Did she really need to ruin his mood? Eric stared at her, but there was no anger in his voice, only mild disappointment. Be that as it may, he couldn't deny that Serena was a pretty good dancer, even despite all their previous attempts. She took it as a compliment, and the Emperor confirmed her suspicions. He had suffered too much while teaching her, so this progress was especially important to him. Serena blushed as she recalled their training. Those moments left quite a few funny memories in her mind. She stepped on his feet time and time again, but he just smiled and said it was okay, even though it was clearly hard to endure. Eric joked that she'd already stepped on his foot 128,419 times. Serena naturally disagreed and indignantly declared that it was actually only 11. Even back then, she couldn't understand how anyone could dance in such high heels. They were so uncomfortable that every step was a struggle. Suddenly, she felt herself losing her balance. Eric immediately grabbed her, preventing her from falling, and worriedly asked if she was okay. Serena quickly recovered, assured him that everything was fine, and gently pulled away, not wanting him to worry too much. Then, without thinking, she took off her shoes and winced. These monstrously uncomfortable things were not for her. She admitted that it would have been better not to wear them at all, because it was impossible not only to dance in them, but even to stand. Deciding it was time to fix it, she asked him to wait while she went to get another pair of shoes. Eric was amazed. He had never seen anyone discard shoes so easily just because they were uncomfortable. A couple of minutes later, Serena returned, holding another pair of shoes, which she would likely find much more comfortable. Serena expressed a desire to know what he would say if it turned out that dancing in sneakers was a possibility. She was interested in his perspective on this unusual idea, as she was seeking his opinion. She'd had these sneakers since high school, and she felt much more comfortable in them. The prince couldn't help but notice how proud she was of them, as they'd become part of her style. Ricardo decided to accept her proposal. He was a little puzzled, but he still understood the importance of returning to traditions such as helping and supporting his partner in the dance. Thanks to her determination and hard work, Serena avoided embarrassment during her high society debut. Her confidence and preparedness surprised everyone present. The emperor still remembered the admiring glances he and Serena had exchanged at that moment. It remained etched in his memory as one of the most vivid memories of that meeting. Prince Ricardo realized he'd never received such looks when he was alone. In Serena's company, his perceptions changed, and he began to look at her with completely different eyes. That's why he began to see her as his savior. Serena had an impact on his life, and he felt he couldn't lose her. She became his support. Working together on a battlefield mission not only brought them closer together, but also strengthened their relationship. It was a time when they became true friends, despite the dangers. He recalled the moments when she would rest lying on his lap. At those moments, he had enjoyed the feeling of her closeness and felt protected in her presence. Ricardo thought they would be together forever. He imagined them spending the rest of their lives in friendship and harmony, enjoying each other's company. However, Serena unexpectedly expressed her desire to leave him. This announcement profoundly changed their relationship, and Ricardo realized he was facing a difficult choice. There were only 2 dances at the ball today, and she decided to save the rest for her wedding. She didn't want to overexert herself and preferred to save everything for a more important moment. Eric told her she should go see her fiancé, but she replied that everything was fine, and she didn't want to distract him. Her calm indicated confidence in her decision. She noticed that Eric was all too good at reading her moods. He always knew what she was feeling, and this sometimes baffled her, because she couldn't hide her thoughts. They stepped out onto the balcony, and Serena pointed at the stars, saying they were incredibly beautiful. Eric looked at her, and although he wasn't sure what she meant, he understood her excitement. The stars in the sky reminded them of the times they fought together. At that moment, despite the fatigue and hardships, they felt like they were part of something great and important. At that moment, Eric remembered how he wanted to enjoy the view of the stars with her, but she said that she was too tired and immediately fell asleep, not letting him enjoy that moment. Serena pointed out that wasn't quite true, and that she definitely hadn't fallen asleep right away, but there was no surprise in her eyes that he remembered that moment as if it were yesterday. She actually fell asleep in his lap at that moment, and it was amazing to her. She couldn't believe how quickly time had passed, but she didn't feel like anything had been lost. Serena approached Eric with a question that had long bothered her. She wanted to understand why he had always been so kind and caring to her, despite all the difficulties. There was genuine interest in his answer in her eyes. She was looking for more than just an explanation. She was hoping for a deep and frank conversation about the feelings they shared. When they first met, they didn't know each other at all. It was unexpected and strange for both of them, as neither of them expected what would happen later. She was sure he was pursuing his own interests, that he needed her strength. He, on the other hand, thought everything would be simpler, but she didn't believe his sincerity. At that moment, he felt like he had won. He was a prince, unaccepted by the people, and she seemed to be the one who could change his life. When he looked at her, he saw something familiar in her eyes. She was like a discovery for him, like a new world he had long been searching for, though he hadn't realized it. But if he said he wasn't interested in her powers, it would be a lie. He knew perfectly well that her abilities played a significant role in his feelings. He was emperor now, but despite the power and titles, everything inside him remained the same. He knew he was caught, but what was he supposed to do about it? She thought that a lot had changed since his ascension to the throne, but he assured her that his feelings for her would remain unchanged despite everything that was happening around him. Serena, however, decided to ask him an important question. Were his feelings for her truly, as he claimed? She was looking for an honest answer that would allow her to understand his intentions. He squeezed her hand, confirming that he felt the same as before, but she couldn't understand why he continued this when he knew perfectly well that nothing would come of their relationship. Eric replied that he was doing it because he was tired of the ambiguity and duality. He still loved her and didn't want to let her go. He said that he was not going to give her to anyone, especially not to that pathetic prince she was with before. Eric looked confused and embarrassed. He repeated that he didn't want to lose her, that he wasn't ready to let her go, despite all the circumstances. Ricardo, standing behind the wall, listened to their conversation. He heard every word, his heart heavy with it, But he could do nothing at that moment. Serena, respecting his sincerity, replied that she couldn't accept his confession. She was grateful for his frankness, but she couldn't believe his words. Eric lowered his head, knowing that such an answer was expected, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there could have been something more between them if she had allowed it. He couldn't understand why she responded that way. She paused for a moment in response to his words, trying to find the right words to explain her feelings. Then she said that if she suddenly told him she was returning to his heart, having spent all her strength, how would he react? It would be interesting to know. What if she became an ordinary person again, without any abilities? Will he be able to love her if she loses everything that was so important to him? Serena, thinking about what might have happened, wondered how it would have affected his feelings. If she had become like everyone else, what then? Eric, despite his confidence, said that things were different before, but now, as a duchess, her role in politics and her power change everything. She strives to achieve great things and is afraid of losing everything she has. Serena knows that any choice could cost her too much, and she is ready to fight for everything. Serena was certain the ruler of an entire empire was experiencing something similar, but far more intensely than she was. She couldn't shake the thought that his feelings were far more intense than her own. She began to doubt whether he could continue to love her if she lost her power. This thought tormented her, for she feared that his feelings might change. She understood that his feelings were his personal business, but she still advised him to think about what was more important to him, herself or her strength, which supported her in this world. She told him he had to decide whether he loved her as a person or just her power. This question remained important and open to her, and she awaited Ricardo's answer. Serena started to leave, and as soon as she stepped into the hallway, she felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted. She felt relieved, but her doubts remained. She finally breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that if Eric really loved her, he would not have hesitated and would have answered immediately without any doubts or omissions. But she still had questions. She didn't know if he'd tried talking to anyone else. She had to get ready for the wedding, and she wanted to put those thoughts behind her. Stepping into the Golden Hall, Serena was surprised that this whole situation continued to unfold. She never expected it to become a topic of discussion. People were whispering again that she'd betrayed her fiancé, but Serena herself wasn't about to listen to such talk. She'd long since grown accustomed to this kind of back and forth. When she turned around, she noticed that several people were discussing her with Prince Ricardo, trying to figure out what was going on between them and what she really felt for him. She couldn't figure out what was going on in this room. Nothing made sense, and she felt like the situation was spiraling out of control. While dancing with Eric, she still tried to understand if he was jealous, and it seemed to her that there was something a little embarrassed and at the same time charming in his gaze. She tried to calm him down, reminding him to forget about that man from Arena. Ricardo was sure he had been abandoned, that he was no longer needed. He couldn't understand how this had happened, because everything seemed to be going differently. The ladies nearby noticed his confusion and began discussing what was going on between him and Serena. The Duchess's fiancé found himself defenseless, and many decided this was their chance to take control of the situation. They intended to find out everything about his relationship with Serena. They started handing him drinks, trying to get information out of him about his connection with the Duchess, trying to find out if he really intended to marry her. All these questions clearly interested those present, and they continued to pour him drinks, hoping that he would open up and tell them everything they wanted to hear. Serena was furious. She went over and took him, deciding she couldn't leave him in such company. The prince needed help, and she couldn't just abandon him. He was very drunk, and Serena had to literally drag him along, leaning on his shoulder. It was a difficult ordeal, but she was determined to help him. The prince pressed himself against her, looking embarrassed, but also pleased. He clearly felt awkward, but his state was also mingled with a certain relief. Serena couldn't understand what could have driven him to such a state of drunkenness. Ricardo's inner conflicts were a mystery to her, and she couldn't find a logical explanation for his actions. She carried him to the sofa and looked around in confusion, wondering who had given him so much alcohol. She couldn't believe that everything that was happening had become reality. She couldn't argue with him, so she was shocked by how quickly he had gotten into such a state. It was all completely unexpected for her. She didn't understand what was making him so upset and why he couldn't let go of these dreams of the past. She didn't know how to cope. Ricardo reached out to her, and as she sat next to him, she felt his gaze genuinely interested in her condition. She sat next to him, stroking his hand. Serena began to wonder if he'd been practicing his reaction to her from the start. It was crucial for her to understand his true intentions. Ricardo spoke to her heart, promising to help her become the person she once was. But her doubts remained, and she couldn't be sure of his motives. Ricardo's true intentions remained a mystery to her. She couldn't quite pinpoint what he really wanted from her, and that left her in limbo. Serena couldn't figure out where this strange heartbeat had suddenly come from. She didn't believe it was coming from Ricardo, but it was so strong and persistent. She knew Ricardo hadn't slept and was probably worried about her, but she couldn't figure out what exactly had triggered such emotions. Everything seemed a little strange. Ricardo was deeply embarrassed. He asked her what exactly was causing her doubts, hoping she would open up and share her concerns. He waited impatiently for her answer. She understood what he expected of her, and so, after a short pause, they kissed passionately, as if trying to find answers to the questions that tormented them both. Ricardo made the first move, and she couldn't contain her feelings any longer. This moment seemed decisive for both of them, and they couldn't ignore it. Serena grabbed his face sharply, telling him he'd had enough. He was drunk, and she couldn't understand what was happening to him, asking how much he'd had. Ricardo wanted to ask her how she reacted to the Emperor's confession. He wondered how she reciprocated his feelings, and whether she'd allowed him anything more. He couldn't resist asking if she'd allowed the Emperor to kiss her, the way she'd kissed him. It was important for him to know this, to understand her feelings. He remembered her words when she said that, after she got her heart back, she would be glad to remain friends with him if they did stay together. She had warned him that if he revealed his true feelings, it would be a heavy burden for her to bear. That warning still rang in his ears. He squeezed her hand, feeling his heart pounding, and asked if she still considered him a good friend, like she used to. He wanted to hear her honest answer. Serena was confused. She had no idea what he was trying to do, and it scared her a little. He looked strange and her mind was full of questions. She thought he must have fallen asleep, but she couldn't understand how he could put on such a strange show and then just fall asleep without noticing what was happening. He continued to mutter something with his eyes closed, but Serena realized it was pointless. He was drunk, and she knew his words meant nothing in his state. Realizing he was beyond help, she decided to lie down next to him. It was her decision to stay by his side despite everything that was happening and to leave him alone. Her body felt incredibly warm, as if she was once again close to someone who could warm her after she had felt only cold for so long. Remembering how she lay next to Lorne, Serena felt that warm feeling. It was the warmth of a friend who gave her the same support she once had. The next morning, Ricardo looked terrible. He was so ill that he could barely stand up, and his every movement betrayed the severe consequences of the night. He tried to justify himself by saying he was very sorry. Serena didn't know why he was so ashamed, since he himself had no memory of what had happened the day before. She thought it would be interesting to know what exactly had prompted him to apologize. The reason seemed unclear, but his apology still sounded sincere. He remarked that if so much pizza was too much, then he really should apologize. The pizza situation seemed funny, but he still felt guilty. Ricardo couldn't ignore the fact that he'd fallen asleep in her bedroom. That, too, was a reason for him to apologize. The whole day began with awkwardness and apologies. When Ricardo saw her in the morning, he was horrified. He was terrified and admitted he didn't know what else he could do, as the events of that day had filled him with anxiety. Serena thought that if he found out what had happened yesterday, his heart would probably stop. It would be too much of a shock for him. To avoid further worrying him, she told him everything was fine, and that he shouldn't worry, nothing terrible had happened, and he could put it all behind him. Serena assured him that yesterday didn't matter, and thanked him for his support. She didn't see it as particularly important, preferring to move on. Even though Serena thought about how long it had been since she'd been in someone else's arms, she still doubted whether she should even ask him to move out. Her mind was unsettled. Finally, she took the plunge and approached Ricardo, asking if he'd be interested in spending every night with her. It was an unexpected request, but it was sincere. Ricardo was surprised and asked her again, not believing his ears. He noticed how warm and gentle she was and couldn't understand the meaning behind such a proposal. It was too unexpected. Ricardo thought it might be a cruel joke, but Serena remained serious. She didn't see anything strange in it since they had been helping each other for a long time. Ricardo responded that this was a very important issue for him, but they were rushing things. They hadn't even gotten married yet, and it seemed premature. Serena didn't think it was that big of a deal. She was confident everything would be fine, and even decided it was perfectly within their agreement. She was planning to go to Arena, and Ricardo was supposed to help her. Her goal was clear. She wanted to destroy the queen, who was causing pain to his people. Ricardo agreed with her plan. From the very beginning, their relationship had been based on mutual agreements, and now he wondered if he could tell her about his stepmother, Queen Rita. Serena noted that she already had an opinion about Rita. She asked Ricardo what he thought of her, since she was the ruler's third wife. There were many rumors about Rita, who never appeared at public events and preferred to engage in politics and philosophy. Then, unexpectedly, she became queen. These facts had long been obvious. Serena couldn't help but notice that Rita wielded unprecedented power and influence. But what did that mean to her? Serena was interested in Ricardo's own feelings about Rita and her power. This was an important element of their conversations and plans for the future. Serena realized that if her suspicions were correct, only she could tell Eric what Ricardo knew about the arena. It would be vital information that needed to be conveyed. However, she underestimated the woman, who might be more complex than she thought. Before traveling to Arena, she needed to get to know this woman better. Ricardo, he said, if it weren't for his true feelings, would say that the queen was indeed a very wise person and that her approach to governing deserved respect. The lady was greatly surprised by these words. She hadn't expected Ricardo to appreciate the queen so much. This made her pause. Her eyes widened in surprise. She asked again, and Ricardo added that there were rumors that she had used the king's love to gain power, which was also a subject of discussion. But in reality, everything turned out differently. Rita really does rule the kingdom in his stead, and does it much better than the king himself, as she is a far more capable ruler. Lady Serena realized that despite her knowledge of the king, Rita was still capable of surprising her. This attracted her, because the woman was not what she had been expected to be. Rita was insightful and very wise, but above all, persistent. She mastered the art of persuasion and always got her way, which earned her respect. Rita truly wanted only the best for her kingdom, because she herself once had the same attitude towards her work, which emphasized her sincerity and loyalty to her beliefs. Serena stopped him and asked if this had anything to do with her actions. He'd clearly forgotten what she'd done to him before, and that was crucial to her decision. The boy remembered how the letter was laced with poison, and noted that in fact, Her Majesty had not been at all like herself lately committing such acts. He was about to say something about the past, but the lady interrupted him. She reminded him that she had once locked him in the laboratory and now couldn't believe her true intentions. The boy fell silent, realizing that even then he didn't believe such actions could be right. He couldn't justify his actions at that moment. If it weren't for Lady Serena, he'd still be in that lab. It would be an unforgivable situation, one he couldn't change. She realized this couldn't go on, and that she wouldn't be able to learn more about Rita through Ricardo. He was clearly under the influence of outside influences. Apparently, he had truly been brainwashed, and now he didn't even realize what he was saying. This became clear to Serena, and she decided to take action on her own. She realized she had no choice but to find out all the details herself. All she could do was trust herself and her intuition. Serena stood up and asked if he was free today, which surprised him. He hadn't expected her to suggest anything out of the ordinary. She invited him to join her if he was bored. She suggested they rob a magical tower together, which seemed like a rather bold proposition. Serena couldn't remember exactly how much time had passed since she last visited the Mage Tower. That visit had been long awaited and important for her. However, she returned to discover that Julius was still the head of the Mage Tower. This was unexpected, and she felt that much had changed. She approached Julius and asked him what he thought of the state of the Mage's Tower. She wondered if it had become as rotten as the aristocracy had become over all this time. Julius was confused and couldn't understand how Serena could make such an accusation. He didn't believe the tower could be as damaged as she claimed. It was Julius, the head of the Mage's Tower. Serena couldn't believe he genuinely believed he was right. She'd heard that a new head was chosen every 3 years through a rigorous test. The question was how Yuli had managed to maintain his position for all these years. The young man thought it was proof of his abilities and his ability to hold on to power. Serena decided to clarify what he meant by his abilities. She couldn't understand how someone with such powers could remain at the top for so long. She asked him if he was really capable of using his magical powers so effectively that he could create a door that connected her casino basement to a huge ring. Julius was stunned. He hadn't expected Serena to probe his abilities so persistently. He felt genuine horror at such unexpected criticism. Serena noted that his decision to connect such a large space to a place located near the capital, without the knowledge of the imperial palace, could be very dangerous. Julius was shocked and tried to justify himself, claiming it was completely absurd. He couldn't understand how Serena could have such suspicions. She argued that many of these people simply don't think before accepting offers. All that matters to them is the fact that they'll get good money. However, perhaps His Majesty didn't understand the full structure and processes of the Mage's Tower, just as she didn't. Serena was ready to argue with him on this point. Yuli apologized, saying he had made a big mistake. He explained that it all happened due to a lack of funds to continue his research, and he hoped to be forgiven. Ricardo even laughed, but Serena stopped him, telling him not to laugh so hard at Julius because his apologies were sincere. Ricardo apologized, but the lady, noting it was irrelevant, suggested they forget about it. Instead, she asked him to explore something far more important at the moment. In fact, it was Emperor Eric who sought to resolve the matter. Julius was willing to agree to anything to avoid further complications in this situation. The lady had heard of a special post office for magicians reserved for high-ranking nobles and the imperial family itself. This place was reserved for a select few. Julius confirmed her information, and the lady immediately recalled Olivia's words about letters actually being sent there. This only strengthened her suspicions. She asked Julius to verify whether Emperor Eric had conducted personal correspondence with Queen Irina and to find out whether such letters existed in the archives. This question was becoming increasingly important. Julius, feeling uneasy, said he didn't want to interfere in political matters, especially such complex ones, but the lady insisted, her voice becoming menacing and decisive. She simply asked to verify the existence of these letters, and in her opinion, it shouldn't have been so difficult. So what was the problem? Julius soon returned with the results. He reported that the records of the emperor's personal correspondence did indeed exist as she had requested. This only added to the mystery. It turned out that the correspondence with Irina was minimal, just a few letters, and most of them concerned classified matters. But why was it all so secretive? Sending such letters required magic meaning. The network was extremely secret. Even its existence was almost elusive, yet somehow the information reached her. Yuli couldn't even imagine the consequences this investigation could have for him. He understood that his involvement in this case could lead to serious consequences. Serena wondered what was hidden behind this correspondence, what important matters these two people could discuss, and what she needed to know about it right now. However, she knew that such a question would be extremely difficult to resolve. The answers were unlikely to be simple, and her actions could lead to undesirable consequences. Rika Irina wasn't just a mysterious figure. Her actions couldn't be ignored. She left traces, but her cunning was that they were nearly impossible to catch. It seemed that Irina had anticipated in advance that someone would investigate her activities and had prepared for the possible consequences by eliminating all traces. The other side of this story was incredibly important. Eric the Emperor at some point became her ally. It was strange, but it turned out to be quite strategically advantageous. After thinking about this, Serena decided that further delaying the investigation would yield no results. She decided to act decisively, despite all the risks. Standing up, she declared that things couldn't go on like this. The time had come, and she was prepared to face the challenges head-on. As she had said before, Ricardo had to be with her. This was her demand, and she wasn't about to ignore it despite all her protests. Lorne, her trusted friend, remarked that this was indeed a very significant and bold proposal. But what would Prince Ricardo say? Lorne couldn't resist her curiosity and inquired how the prince had responded to Serena's request. She was curious to know how he would justify his actions. Serena said Ricardo tried to persuade her to abandon this decision, citing honor, tradition, and other persuasions, but all his attempts were futile. In the end, despite all his arguments, Ricardo couldn't help but agree. He admitted he couldn't resist her determination and finally gave his consent. Serena only stated that the prince should stay with her because the palace was too dangerous, but in reality, she couldn't hide the fact that there was something more behind it. Lauren was completely shocked that everything she'd heard was true. Even the gossip rumors were saying that Serena and the prince were finally in love. Serena would like to apologize to Marina, as this marriage is merely a convenient arrangement, but on the other hand, she has been given a unique opportunity to design a dress for the couple in love. It was a truly great achievement for her, as the dress was intended for such an important person. For her, it wasn't just a commission, but a true honor. When Serena saw the dress, she was simply stunned by its beauty. It was so magnificent that she even considered wearing it down the aisle. Marina was overjoyed, but something seemed missing. She noticed it, And when she mentioned it, Serena agreed, as she too had sensed something was wrong. Standing in front of the mirror, Serena realized it wasn't her dress or jewelry that was the problem, but her hair. She hadn't changed it in a long time, and now it was clearly noticeable. Marina, seeing her hair, began to think that perhaps the lady was really thinking about changing her hairstyle and that this could be an excellent solution. Serena looked at her friend and agreed, deciding at that moment that a change was necessary. Meanwhile, the prince waited patiently for her in the next room. There's probably no need to worry. After the dress fitting, there won't be much left to do, and most of the wedding preparations will be completed. Everything is going according to plan. Lady Serena reassured her friend, saying that if they could come up with something simple and elegant, it would be just right for such an important event. But Serena was certain that this wedding had to be grander than all the previous ones. The more extravagant the ceremony, the more people would enjoy talking about it. During the conversation, everyone remarked on how deeply the Duchess was in love with the prince. There was such genuine love in her eyes that her decision to travel to the prince's homeland seemed natural. She loved him so much that she was even ready to leave her home and go with him to the place where he grew up to be there at this important moment. This trip to Arena immediately after the wedding would not cause any confusion because it would be a natural continuation of their new life together. Although, to be honest, Serena thought that the whole thing looked more like a carefully planned event than an accident, and she was a little worried about it. Serena then called him over, noting that it had probably taken too long, but some changes were still needed, and they needed to make adjustments to their plans. The gentleman asked her what he thought about it. When he looked at her closely, he noticed that her hair had now become a darker shade, and this greatly surprised him. Serena thought maybe she really should dye her hair, as she'd been advised. It seemed like a necessary step to change her look. Marina noted that she felt the same way and believed she should radically change her style and update her image. That could be a good move for her at this time. He was outside, and she could ask his opinion if she wanted, but she was sure he would simply say that she was still beautiful. Serena knew he'd probably just say she looked as gorgeous as ever, and that there was no need to worry so much about the changes. Her appearance was flawless to him. He often told her she was beautiful, no matter how she changed her style. Serena was sure he would say the same this time too, that the new color suited her very well. As expected, he approached her and began examining her hair, but his reaction was unexpected, and she couldn't have imagined he would react so strangely. His face was completely shocked. He couldn't hide his surprise, and turned his attention to her hair, as if trying to figure out what had happened to it. She couldn't understand why he looked so upset. His reaction seemed strange, since she thought he'd already gotten used to her hair experiments. She was surprised that he was so shocked because she was always changing her hair color, and he seemed to be used to these changes. He noticed with bewilderment that she had been hiding the truth all this time. This wasn't her real hair, and only now did he realize she had dyed it. The guy admitted he'd suspected it, but never mentioned it. He was worried he hadn't been aware, even though it wasn't that important. 3 cards noted that he never said he didn't know about her changes. However, the lady reminded him that only a few knew her true hair color. In fact, no one but Ricardo knew her true color. He was the one who was always by her side and saw her without her masks. Perhaps only a few people could have guessed her secret, including perhaps Ricardo. He was a close friend, and his knowledge of her was deeper. Serena realized he now knew her secret. It wasn't as surprising as she'd expected, but she was still curious what he thought about it. She wanted to know what Ricardo thought of her new look. She hoped his opinion would be as warm and supportive as always. Marina decided that this color best suited her dress. The prince, observing her, said he had always admired her light hair, soft and shiny. Very few people know a lady with such sparse sable hair. This makes her even more mysterious and unique, attracting the attention of everyone who meets her. She would be very sorry if others saw her like this. She didn't understand what exactly he meant by this because he was restrained in his words. He didn't say outright that he really liked her then, but there was something in his gaze that made her feel that her interest in him was clearly lacking. She was very surprised by his frankness, even embarrassed. In response, she calmly said that, for her, that was enough. She was no longer prepared to discuss such things. She firmly stated that she wasn't prepared to hear anything like that now, even if it was just a joke. This wasn't the time for such conversations. But he could not understand why she was so categorical about his words and actions, which made the situation even more incomprehensible for both of them. She explained that recent events and this love were giving her a headache. She'd told him this more than once, but he still continued his persistent behavior. Eric confessed his feelings, but Serena couldn't accept it. She told him it was time to end this conversation and leave, otherwise it would drag on too long. At one point, he asked her what she had just said. He had a fiancé, but he confessed his feelings anyway. She firmly rejected him. The refusal was cold-blooded, but she was confident in her decision. Serena felt she had done the right thing by turning him down, and that had brought closure to the situation. After her refusal, he seemed a little relieved. He practically beamed, though it was strange, since she had turned him down. This only confused her even more. Serena, seeing his reaction, asked what this strange reaction was, because she thought he already knew about her refusal. It was all so unexpected. He looked surprised, and she asked if he really hadn't known Eric had confessed to her. His face said so, as if he couldn't hide his surprise. He noted that he'd noticed a few things. She was acting as if everything was obvious, and this Eric was too intrusive for her tastes. Serena thought that if he had told her earlier, she might have avoided situations like this with Eric, so as not to complicate their already tense relationship. She believed that Ricardo was simply holding back and trying to keep his emotions under control, despite how much their relationship meant to him. She couldn't understand why Ricardo was always so cautious around her. His reserve sometimes seemed too much of a barrier, but she understood the reasons. Serena said that he could express his dislike for Eric and suggest that she leave the Empire to avoid further problems with him and the others. But Ricardo remarked that he didn't see how he could propose such a thing. He knew how much the Empire meant to her and didn't want to deprive her of that important position. He asked how much she meant to him, but also noted that Serena had already rejected the Emperor's proposal. It was a significant moment in their relationship. She made it clear that her refusal was cold-blooded, and that was enough for him to understand her position. Ricardo was certain that it didn't matter what the future held or what others said. As long as Serena was by his side, he felt content. He asked her not to worry about him, hoping she would follow her own desires. Olivia greeted Serena and smiled, noting that her new hair color looked absolutely stunning. She admired her style and beauty, as if she had everything in the world in her hands. Olivia asked what had brought Serena to her house today. Her gaze was curious, and she expected some important explanation or news from her friend. Serena, a little confused, didn't know how to begin. She needed to tell him about Eric's confession, but she couldn't figure out how to say it properly. It all felt wrong. Her mind was spinning, and she couldn't think of a way to start the conversation. She felt her nervousness growing, despite her attempts to collect her thoughts. Finally, she made up her mind and said that her fiancé had confessed his feelings to her, but she wasn't worried about it because she'd already rejected him. All she felt now was a desire to avoid pain. She remained silent, but Olivia waited with a smile for her to continue. Apparently, she was ready to hear more, though her face expressed a slight wariness. Serena knew she couldn't open up to Olivia the way she wanted. She felt her words couldn't convey the full complexity of her inner state. She calmly stated that she had no plans to spend her honeymoon in Arena. It was her decision, and she hoped it wouldn't raise any unnecessary questions. Olivia was surprised to learn it was so far away, and noted that Arena was Ricardo's homeland. She was surprised that Serena hadn't been there in a while, continuing to hide the details from Olivia. Serena admitted she wasn't just there for her honeymoon. In fact, she just wanted to socialize and take her mind off her worries. Olivia said she had something important she wanted to share with Serena, too. Her face was determined, and she wasn't going to keep it a secret. Serena was a little surprised that Olivia wanted to tell her something, too, and immediately asked what it was. It was important to her, and she expected the conversation to continue. Olivia shared that Her Majesty had told her something important. He had told her he had confessed his feelings to Serena, and it had been a revelation to her.